Chapter 1. Flight. Heart pounding in sync with the rhythm of battle, breath ragged and desperate, a lone guardsman sprinted down the shattered thoroughfare, his every step a testament to the relentless weight of duty. The tattered standard of the 142nd Company fluttered above him, its fabric heavy with the burdens of countless campaigns, dragging at his weary soul with each faltering stride. With a desperate lunge, he threw himself prone behind the twisted wreckage of a once proud Imperial assault vehicle, now merely a charred hulk belching forth infernal flames that danced hungrily towards the heavens. The acrid stench of burning promethium clawed at his senses, mingling with the thick smoke that billowed forth, obscuring the battlefield in a shroud of ash and putrid smoke. The guardsman pressed himself low against the scorched earth, seeking refuge from both the searing heat of the flames and the overwhelming possibility of enemy fire. Sweat streamed down his furrowed brow, mingling with the soot and grime that caked his Astra Militarum uniform. Not that the filth bothered him at the moment. He'd rather be dirty than dead. Summoning forth a flicker of courage from the depths of his trembling soul, he dared to steal a glance back along the path he had traversed. Through the haze of dust that choked the air, the shadowy forms of his fellow guardsmen emerged, their las rifles spitting crimson streaks into the smoke that obscured the street. A surge of apprehension clawed at his heart, threatening to overwhelm him, yet he quelled the rising tide of panic with grim determination. Guarding the company's standard was his sworn duty, a sacred trust regardless of the peril that beckoned. But as he pondered his next move, a new chill gripped his soul like a vice. Reaching for his lasgun, he found it nowhere to be seen, lost amidst the chaos of his desperate retreat. With frantic urgency, he scoured the debris strewn about him, praying to him on terror for a sign of its return. Alas, fortune had abandoned him in this hour of need, leaving him to curse the cruel whims of fate. "By the throne," he grumbled under his breath, his frustration boiling over as he realized the weapon had slipped from his grasp. "That's the third time this month I lose my lasgun. Captain will have my head for this," he mused grimly, the weight of impending retribution bearing down upon him like a milestone. Yet, amid his turmoil, a darker notion wormed its way into his consciousness. If the captain yet draws breath, that is. The tumult of battle intensified around him, a savage symphony of violence that resonated with the ferocity of an untamed storm. No longer were the flashes of lasfire from his comrades mere sporadic bursts. Now, the very air crackled with a constant crimson glow, painting the surroundings in a ghastly hue. Amidst the chaotic din, a deeper, more ominous resonance echoed forth, the thunderous cadence of enemy bolter fire. In the blink of an eye, the once defiant forms of his brothers and sisters in arms were consumed in a macabre ballet of destruction. Their bodies erupted in a grotesque spectacle, torn asunder by the merciless fury of explosive ordnance. A sickening shower of viscera painted the battlefield, casting a pall of horror over the grim tableau. A grimace twisted the guardsman's features as he beheld the carnage, his gaze drawn inexorably to the scattered remnants of one of his fallen brethren. Following the trail of VIII that marred the ground, his eyes traced the grisly path to its source, where fragments of flesh and bone clung defiantly to the scarred surface of a wall behind where the guardsman had stood. "I have to get out of here," he exclaimed in a panicked breath, his voice tinged with a mixture of trepidation and sudden determination. With trembling hands, he gingerly removed the banner from its pole, a reluctant acknowledgement that its unwieldy bulk would hinder his escape and mark him as an easy target, even amongst the smoke and detritus of the battlefield. As he wrestled the standard free, he began stuffing it unceremoniously into his backpack. "With my accursed luck, this is probably the first and only moment the Emperor deigns to cast his gaze upon me," he pondered with a sardonic twist to his thoughts. Shaking his head, he raised his eyes to the heavens, the weight of his actions heavy upon his conscience. "If you bear witness, O Emperor, forgive this sacrilegious treatment of this most sacred standard," he murmured, as he stuffed the rest of the banner into his filthy bag. He contemplated invoking the sacred sign of the Aquila as a gesture of supplication. Yet, before the sacred ritual could find purchase in his trembling heart, the thunderous report of bolt gun fire echoed down the desolate street once more, mingling with the anguished cries of the fallen. A bolt round, its malevolent trajectory guided by unseen hands through the thick smog, struck the burning wreckage that served as his meagre sanctuary, sending sparks flying in a shower of fiery defiance. His blood ran cold as dread gripped him. "They found me!" he gasped, the realization a cruel dagger thrust into his already frayed resolve. With panic clawing at his senses, he abandoned all pretense of stealth, his instinct screaming for flight in the face of overwhelming odds. In a frantic bid for survival, he broke into a desperate sprint, his boots pounding against the shattered pavement as he fled. Hastening to seek refuge behind the nearest edifice, the guardsman dared not risk a glance over his quivering shoulder. The chaotic symphony of battle raged unabated, a cacophony of lasfire, bolt-arounds, and thunderous explosions reverberating through the air like a dirge for the damned. Every step propelled him forward, driven by a primal fear that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. The sounds of conflict served as a grim reminder of the danger that lurked at his heels, a relentless predator poised to strike at the slightest hesitation. With every sinew strained to its limit, he raced through the debris-strewn streets, his path an uncoordinated ballet of evasion and endurance. Each obstacle became a trial to overcome, his weary legs protesting with each agonizing step as he navigated the labyrinth of ruins that choked the cityscape. Abruptly, veering sharply between the looming silhouettes of two war-torn structures, he was faced with a towering mass of shattered masonry that barred his path like a grim sentinel. Frantically scanning the confines of the narrow alley, his heart sank as he beheld the absence of any alternative route, while the menacing cadence of battle drew ever nearer behind him. Driven by a primal instinct to survive, he launched himself at the formidable obstacle before him, his hands clawing frantically at the jagged remnants of rockcrete and twisted rebar that comprised its treacherous face. With each perilous foothold gained, he ascended the crumbling monolith, his breath ragged and laboured amidst the suffocating grip of fear that threatened to consume him whole. As he neared the crest of the barricade, a frigid sensation of being watched seized him, as though some unseen malevolence had fixed its gaze upon his desperate flight. With a surge of adrenaline, he hurled himself over the jagged summit, his heart pounding in dread and anticipation. A fleeting glimpse of a colossal shadow loomed overhead, eclipsing the feeble light from the sky above, before his world was consumed by a chaotic descent. Tumbling headlong down the treacherous incline, he fought to find a handhold amidst the relentless pull of gravity, his hands desperately searching for purchase upon the unforgiving terrain. Sharp shards of debris tore at his flesh, rending his garments and leaving bloody trails in their wake. With a sickening thud, he crashed to the dusty ground below, the impact driving the air from his lungs in a rush of agony. Lying sprawled upon the unforgiving ground, he fought to draw ragged breaths into his aching lungs, his mind a tempest of disoriented thoughts. "It's not the fall that claims you," he muttered darkly to himself, a bitter smirk twisting his lips, "but the sudden stop at the end." His moment of sardonic reflection was abruptly shattered by a thunderous detonation that rent the air, the ground quaking beneath him in a violent symphony of destruction. With a jolt of adrenaline, he sprang to his feet, his senses sharpened by the imminent threat that lurked just beyond the barricade he had traversed. Turning to a sprint, he pressed on despite the searing agony that lanced through his left leg with every faltering step. Again, a sense of unease gnawed at the edge of his consciousness, compelling him to seek refuge behind the relative shelter of an unscathed ground car. Throwing himself against the car's resilient frame, he winced as the force of his impact left a deep indent in its sturdy door. Yet, if that trivial damage he had wrought was the only the vehicle would sustain, he figured the owner should consider themselves lucky. His eyes darted furtively across the desolate landscape, his senses keenly attuned to the slightest hint of danger. Yet again he entertained the notion that unseen eyes gazed upon him, but despite his vigilance, he found naught but the oppressive silence of the empty street beyond. As the moments stretched into an eternity of silence, he begrudgingly accepted a bitter truth. He was alone. "Well, ain't this a fine mess you're in, Banner?" he muttered darkly to himself, the weight of his predicament pressing down upon him like a leaden shroud. Surveying the desolate wasteland that stretched out before him, he sought in vain for any signpost amidst the chaos of ruin and devastation. Every direction seemed fraught with death, a labyrinth of smoke-choked alleys and shattered edifices. With grim resolve, he closed his eyes, surrendering to the capricious whims of fate. "When in doubt," he muttered, his voice tinged with bitter resignation, "there's only one way forward." With a careless gesture, he waved his hand in a haphazard fashion, invoking the ancient nursery rhyme of chants. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, he intoned, settling on a direction with reckless determination. That way! Chapter 2. The Grey Behemoth. Bracing himself against the sturdy chassis of the vehicle, he pushed through the agony that gnawed at his weary limbs, rising once more to his feet. With determined resolve, he set off, his path dictated by the arbitrary whims of chance. Though the clamour of battle continued to echo in the recesses of his mind, its cacophony gradually receded into the distance with each laboured stride. Yet even as the tumult diminished, its spectral presence lingered, a haunting reminder of the relentless pursuit that dogged his every step. His progress was swiftly halted as the path ahead became obstructed once more, forcing him to veer sharply into the labyrinthine maze of side streets. Each step was a torment, his limbs ablaze with the searing agony of exertion. With gritted teeth, he brushed aside the stinging sweat that blurred his vision. When did this sweat turn to acid? He mused grimly, his thoughts fighting to tear him from the cruel reality of his plight. Forced to round yet another corner, he came to an abrupt halt, his senses tingling with the eerie stillness that pervaded the desolate square before him. Surrounded by the shattered remnants of once grand structures, the plaza lay in silent homage to the devastation that had befallen it. Amongst the ruins, a solitary figure stood at its centre, a statue wrought in the likeness of one of the Emperor's revered saints, though its identity eluded him. Strangely untouched by the ravages of war, the statue stood defiant amid the carnage, its pristine white marble a stark contrast to the charred rubble that lay strewn about it. Muttering under his breath in a futile attempt to steady his frayed nerves, Banner cautiously approached the enigmatic statue, his every step weighted with trepidation. Yet, as he drew nearer, an unsettling realization gripped him, a silence so profound it seemed to consume the very air around him. It was not the absence of sight, or any tangible presence that gave him pause, but rather the absence of sound, the once thunderous symphony of battle reduced to an eerie stillness that hung heavy in the air. Gone were the cacophonous echoes of warfare, replaced instead by a suffocating quiet that seemed to amplify the ragged rasp of his own breath, each exhalation a potential betrayal of his presence amidst the desolation. Jolted by the oppressive void that enveloped him, Banner relinquished his pursuit of the enigmatic statue, his instinct for self-preservation compelling him to seek refuge amidst the dilapidated ruins that loomed nearby. Collapsing against a crumbling wall, he fought to steady his ragged breaths. "Well, this is a right mess," he muttered, his voice tinged with a tremor of uncertainty. "Think, Banner, think! We know it's not your forte, but you've got to come up with something!" His mind raced with disjointed fragments of the path that he had taken to get there, each recollection a tangled web of confusion and doubt. Left, then right, then straight ahead, he muttered, his thoughts a whirlwind of indecision. Or was it straight ahead, then left, then right? Banner's ramblings were abruptly quelled when his senses prickled with a sudden awareness, a looming presence that stirred the very shadows around him. Startled by the ominous movement, he squeezed his eyes shut, a reflexive gasp escaping his lips before he could stifle it by covering his mouth. Forcing himself to silence, he cautiously opened his eyes, his gaze darting frantically in search of a safe place to hide in the ruins, but it was too late. Before him stood a towering figure, its form obscured by the dim light that filtered through the cloudy sky above. With a voice like rolling thunder, it commanded, "Guardsmen, get up!" Banner's frantic mind struggled to process the commanding words that reverberated through the desolate square. For a fleeting moment, he remained frozen, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the figure before him. Observing the guardsman's hesitation, the towering figure repeated its directive with a force that brooked no disobedience. "I said get up!" Driven by an instinct born of primal fear, Banner obeyed without hesitation, rising to his feet with a stiffened resolve. Gazing upon the colossal figure, a fresh wave of terror washed over him, for he realized that even standing, he barely reached the midpoint of the towering man's chest. Banner beheld the formidable figure standing before him, a towering manifestation of the Emperor's indomitable wrath. Clad in the revered armor of the Adeptus Astartes, the towering warrior stood as a living embodiment of imperial might. Grey ceramite, emblazoned with intricate gold lettering and crimson accents, adorned his formidable frame. Upon his breastplate, the sigil of the Imperial Inquisition gleamed with ominous authority, a silent proclamation of his allegiance to the highest echelons of imperial power. As Banner's gaze ascended to meet the gaze of the armoured behemoth, he found himself transfixed by the crystalline blue lenses of the Astartes helm. Yet it was not merely the imposing visage of the Space Marine that struck his heart with fear and awe, but the revelation of his formidable armour, a suit of Terminator plate, unlike any he had encountered before. Its angular lines and elegant curves spoke of a design both ancient and mysterious, a relic of forgotten wars and untold secrets that lurked within the annals of Imperial history. "I heard a little girl screaming," the Astartes intoned impassively through his vox grill, his voice a rumbling echo of distant thunder. "She was just around here a moment ago. You must find her." Banner's brow furrowed in confusion, his mind racing to recall any sign of a child amidst the desolation that surrounded him. Yet, even as he searched his memory, he found no recollection of such a presence. Nevertheless, in the presence of a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, obedience was paramount. A command from such a being carried the weight of imperial decree. Without a word of protest, Banner set off. Scouring through the rubble-strewn square, he scanned every shadow, every crevice, in search of the phantom child. Though he sensed no trace of her whereabouts, he dared not question the Astartes' assertion of her presence. Glancing back over his shoulder, Banner observed the Astartes, his towering form easily discerned amidst the shattered remnants of the square. With his back turned to Banner, the warrior stood vigilant, his gaze fixed upon the desolate streets that radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel. Periodically he would pivot his head, scanning the thoroughfares with a watchful intensity. It was then that Banner's attention was drawn to the weapon at the Astartes' side, a colossal blade of gleaming metal, unlike any he had seen before. Its form was of otherworldly craftsmanship, with sinuous curves and jagged spikes that seemed to writhe like serpents in the flickering light. Yet, it was not merely the design of the blade that unsettled Banner, but the eerie green glow that emanated from its surface, casting an almost imperceptible, yet very tangible pallor upon the surrounding ruins. However, it was the sword's guard that truly captured Banner's unease, an intricate symbol etched into the metal, the twisted sigil seemingly radiating with a malevolent energy. As he beheld the ominous emblem, a sensation of discomfort gnawed at his senses, as though the very fabric of reality itself recoiled from the sight. "Guardsman, have you found the child?" The Astartes' voice boomed across the square, a thunderous rumble that shook Banner back from his reverence of the Astartes' strange weaponry. Though the warrior's gaze remained fixed upon the desolate streets beyond, his words pierced through the air with a weight that demanded immediate attention. Sensing the urgency in the Astartes' command, Banner hastened to his side, his heart pounding in his chest. "No, my lord," Banner stammered, his voice trembling with trepidation. Before he could utter another word, a violent tremor reverberated through the ground, accompanied by the deafening crash of debris. To his right, amidst the swirling dust, Banner caught sight of a colossal shadow disappearing into the shattered facade of a ruined building. "It matters not. It's too late to find her now," the Astartes declared, his voice resonating with a chilling finality. "Where is your weapon?" I lost it, my lord," Banner confessed, his voice quivering with shame. The Astartes offered no response, his cold gaze fixed upon the street where the shadow had vanished. The swirling dust cloud obscured his vision, shrouding the thoroughfare in an impenetrable haze that even his enhanced sight struggled to pierce. As the ground continued to tremble beneath their feet, the rumble growing more pronounced with each passing moment, a sudden high-pitched screech pierced the dusk-choked air. "The child is close!" the Astartes boomed, as much a proclamation of the observation as a command to find her. Before any further words could be exchanged, the scream abruptly ceased. With a swift pivot, the Space Marine scanned the desolate landscape, his gaze sweeping across the shattered remnants of the once thriving city. Yet it was not the sight of the girl that met his eyes, but the trembling form of the guardsman, one hand over his mouth and the other pointing away from them. Following the line of the guardsman's trembling finger, the Astartes beheld the shadow of a monstrous entity emerging from a nearby building, a spectre that heralded the arrival of an even greater danger. "Emperor preserve us," the Astartes muttered, his voice a low growl of discontent. "This is no place for mortals." Banner's gaze remained transfixed upon the monstrous entity that loomed before them, its grotesque form obscured by shifting shadows. Though its features remained partially obscured, the sight of the creature sent a shiver of dread coursing through Banner's veins. The writhing tentacles that enveloped its massive frame seemed to move with an otherworldly malevolence, a stark reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. In a voice quavering with fear, Banner uttered a desperate query. "My lord, we should run, right?" "Wrong," the Astartes replied, his tone unwavering in its resolve. To Banner's astonishment, the towering figure of the Astartes surged forward, his massive form propelled by an unfathomable determination. With his sword held aloft, he charged towards the monstrous entity with a swiftness that defied his colossal stature. Yet even the Astartes' formidable might was not enough to overcome the abomination before him. Before he could close the distance, a sinewy tentacle lashed out with blinding speed, striking the Space Marine with devastating force. The sickening sound of impact echoed through the desolate square, a wet crack that sent shivers through Banner as the Astartes was sent hurtling through the air. With reflexes honed by years of combat experience, he twisted, contorting mid-flight, crashing to the ground with elegant grace in a thunderous impact. One hand and knee met the unforgiving rockcrete floor, the weight of his armored form shattering the earth like a small meteor. In that moment, a surge of primal energy coursed through Banner's veins, igniting a flicker of bravery within his trembling soul. He knew not whence it came, but a fierce determination gripped his heart. He would shield the Grey Warrior from harm, whatever the cost. With unsteady legs driven by an unseen force, Banner positioned himself defiantly before the colossal monstrosity. "You shall not!" His voice trailed off, his trembling words barely audible amidst the roars and slithering sounds coming from the monster. As he locked eyes with the oncoming horror, his resolve faltered, crumbling like brittle parchment in the face of the creature's unrelenting advance. The monstrous entity loomed closer, its writhing tentacles slicing the air with horrifying precision. In that moment of stark terror, Banner's fleeting courage dissolved into nothing, replaced by a chilling realization of his own mortality. The surge of bravery that had momentarily emboldened Banner was swiftly extinguished, drowned beneath the tidal wave of abject terror that now consumed him. With a trembling voice barely above a whisper, he uttered a desperate plea, his words a fervent invocation to the divine. "My God, Emperor, I've not asked you for much. Well, that's not true," he amended hastily. "But I really need your help. Please!" The entity, its monstrous form drawing ever closer to the guardsman, loomed menacingly over Banner, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the feeble light of the desolate square. In its presence, Banner appeared as naught but a small child, dwarfed by the warp-infused magnitude of the creature. With a primal growl that reverberated through the air like the rumble of distant thunder, the abomination reared up on its sinewy legs, its towering frame eclipsing the heavens themselves. A massive gash split open in its hide, revealing a cavernous maw lined with rows of jagged teeth that gleamed with a malevolent hunger. The stench of its breath hung heavy in the air, a putrid miasma that clawed at Banner's senses, threatening to overwhelm him with its noxious intensity. As he gazed into the yawning abyss of the creature's maw, a peculiar sensation washed over the trooper, a surge of defiance that seemed to defy reason itself. Whether it was his courage reigniting like a flickering flame, or the tendrils of sanity slipping from his grasp, he could not say. Meanwhile, the Astartes, having regained his footing, observed the unfolding spectacle with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. A faint, golden aura seemed to envelop the guardsman, its origins shrouded in mystery. Whether it was divine intervention from the God-Emperor upon his throne, or merely the ethereal rays of sunlight piercing the oppressive cloud cover, the Space Marine could not discern. Yet, as the radiant glow suffused Banner's being, a palpable surge of power coursed through him, filling him with a newfound strength and resolve. With a fierce glint in his eyes and a voice laden with righteous fury, Banner uttered a brave proclamation that echoed through the desolation like a clarion call of defiance. "You shall not pass!" For a fleeting instant, the entity's serpentine appendages faltered, momentarily startled by the audacity of the insignificant mortal, daring to oppose it. Yet this brief respite was but a passing illusion, swiftly shattered as the abomination recoiled from its surprise, unleashing a vicious assault upon Banner. With a sickening impact that rent the air with a sound akin to the snap of a whip, the guardsman was hurled through the air, his trajectory halted only by the unforgiving embrace of a nearby pile of rubble. The force of the blow comparable to the brutal impact of an Astartes rhino careening through a fortress wall. With grim resignation, the Astartes called out, his voice carrying across the desolate square with an urgency born of concern. "Guardsman, are you okay?" To his astonishment, the Space Marine witnessed a stirring amidst the rubble, a trembling hand emerging from the debris, its thumb raised in a gesture of defiant resilience. The Astartes had scant moments to ponder further inquiries, for a colossal tentacle lashed out with malevolent intent, descending upon him with lethal force. Reacting by instinct and knowledge gathered over millennia of combat, the Space Marine leapt aside with lightning agility, narrowly evading the deadly strike. The impact of the tentacle rent the rockcrete asunder, leaving a jagged chasm in its wake. Rather than heed the impulse to charge headlong into the fray, the Astartes stood firm, his countenance a mask of grim determination. Adopting a defensive stance, he prepared to confront the next attack, steely gaze fixed upon writhing appendage. Experience had taught him that in battle against such a foe there was no room for recklessness, only calculated precision and unwavering resolve. The beast prowled the desolate expanse, its sinuous tentacles probing the air with sinister purpose. With each inhalation, it seemed to sample the very essence of its surroundings. Yet, despite its keen senses, the creature remained blind to the presence of its adversaries, a fact that did not escape the keen observation of the Astartes. As realization dawned upon him, the Space Marine discerned the truth of the entity's blindness. It possessed no eyes to perceive the world around it. A cunning plan began to form in the warrior's mind, a plan that would exploit the creature's fatal flaw. With a swift motion, he raised his blade once more, assuming a stance of readiness as he prepared to put his theory to the test. In response to the Space Marine's movement, the entity reacted with lightning speed, a tentacle lashing out with deadly precision. Reacting with his instinctual agility, the Marine leapt backwards, evading the crushing strike, leaving the tentacle to strike open air where he once stood. Regaining his balance, the Astartes bellowed to his comrade, his voice ringing out with authority. "Guardsman! Its vision is based on movement. Stay still!" The Astartes watched with a sinking feeling as the guardsman emerged from the rubble, clutching a mysterious object in his hand. With swift motion, the guardsman struck the item against the ground, eliciting a brilliant burst of crimson light that bathed the surroundings in its fiery glow. "What did you say?" Banner's voice rang out, his tone a mixture of defiance and urgency as he brandished the red battle flare overhead. The Astartes, a tinge of exasperation coloring his words, replied with measured patience. "I said its vision is based on Before he could finish his warning, another tentacle lashed out with lethal intent, forcing the Astartes to evade once more, his movement a blur of calculated evasion. Witnessing the onslaught, Banner responded in kind, his actions growing more frantic as he waved the flare with increasing urgency, his voice rising to a fervent pitch. "Don't worry! I'll draw it off so you can attack it!" Banner's voice ran out, brimming with misplaced confidence. "No, stop!" The Astartes' warning was lost amidst the entity's bellows. "Hey, ugly!" Banner's taunt cut through the din, his arms flailing as he attempted to provoke the towering monstrosity. "Yes! You with the overgrown dreadlocks! Over here!" The Astartes heaved a weary sigh, knowing the folly of the guardsman's bravado even before it unfolded. Before Banner could complete his ill-advised quip, a savage tentacle lashed out once more, sending the foolhardy mortal crashing through the air with bone-jarring force, his trajectory ending in a familiar crash against the unforgiving rubble. "Are you okay?" The Astartes' voice echoed across the desolation, a note of weary resignation threading his words. To his astonishment, a familiar sight greeted him once more, a hand brandishing a raised thumb emerging from the debris. Despite the odds, the mortal persisted. How is he still alive? The question echoed within the Astartes' mind, making him reevaluate the resilience of the mortal amidst the relentless onslaught of the void-born horror that assailed them. Yet, Such contemplation was a luxury he could ill afford for long. The entity's malevolent intent remained undiminished, its predatory instincts honed to a razor's edge by untold eons of primal hunger. In the blink of an eye, the creature struck once more, its sinewy appendage lashing out with lethal precision. But the Astartes was prepared. With swift movements, he evaded the oncoming attack, his blade flashing with precise intent as it descended upon the writhing tentacle. In a slice that was no more than a blur, the tainted limb was severed, reduced to smouldering embers that fizzled and dissolved upon the accursed ground. The entity emitted a guttural screech, its primal fury unleashed as it surged forward once more. Despite the Astartes' valiant efforts, the relentless assault found its mark, ensnaring the warrior's limbs in a vice-like embrace. Yet, even in the grip of the abomination, the Astartes remained undaunted, his weapon arm still free and his resolve unyielding. As the creature's gaping maw gnashed hungrily, threatening to consume its prey whole, the Astartes discerned an opportunity. With measured patience, he awaited the precise moment to unleash his counterattack, poised to strike when the opportunity presented itself. Just as he drew near to striking range, a defiant cry rose above the oppressive noise of the entity's roars, echoing through the war-torn landscape. "Hey! Squig-dung with tentacles!" Banner's voice pierced the air, drawing the entity's attention like a beacon. "Yes, you! Look over here!" With a series of erratic movements resembling the frantic dance of a startled fowl, Banner cavorted amidst the rubble, his actions a peculiar spectacle that defied comprehension. The Astartes, concealed behind his helm, could only marvel at the curious display, silently offering gratitude to the Emperor for shielding his face from view, as he did not dare to consider what his expression might have been in reaction to the absurdity unfolding before him. Yet, to his further astonishment, he discerned a most unexpected development. The entity, devoid of ocular organs, had seemingly fixed its attention upon the mortal, its grotesque visage contorting in an imitation of the Astartes' own, in response to his antics. The Astartes' disbelief was palpable as he beheld the surreal scene unfolding before him. Seizing the moment of disarray, the Astartes plunged his sword deep into the writhing mass of the entity, eliciting a harrowing shriek as the creature relinquished its hold on the stoic warrior. Recoiling from the searing strike, the abomination thrashed wildly, its movements sending its sinuous appendages into a frenetic frenzy. With a deafening roar of agony, the entity's form began to unravel, dissolving into smouldering embers that consumed its twisted flesh with voracious fervor. As the last echoes of its torment echoed through the desolate landscape, the monstrous entity succumbed to the inexorable march of destruction, reduced to naught but a towering pile of charred ash and smouldering remnants, scattered to the merciless wind. Wheeling around to face the still clamoring guardsman, the Astartes' voice resonated with a mixture of bewilderment and ire. "By the throne and all his saints, what manner of madness was that?" The guardsman, his expression a blend of confusion and a hint of self-satisfaction, glanced up at the towering warrior. "What do you mean? It worked, didn't it?" he retorted, a spark of pride evident in his voice as he gestured towards the smouldering heap of ash with a boyish grin. Chapter 3. The Grey Knight. The Astartes shook his head in dismay, his gaze swiftly scouring the desolate surroundings. He understood all too well that the tumultuous clash with the abomination would have acted as a clarion call to more of the foe, drawing them inexorably towards their position. It was only a matter of time before the enemy descended upon them in force. Fortune had favoured them in facing only a single monstrosity, and even more so in triumphing over it, courtesy of the guardsman's unorthodox tactics. "We must leave, at once. This place isn't safe," the Astartes declared, his tone unyielding. "More of them will be coming, drawn by the anguished cries of their fallen kin." What was that thing?" Banner's bravado dissolved into fear. "A demon of Tzeentch," the Astartes responded grimly, his words hanging heavy in the air. "This world is besieged by the Immaterium, by chaos itself." Banner emitted a nervous chuckle. "A demon? You must be joking. Demons belong in fairy tales and legends. They aren't real." The Astartes gestured towards the charred remains, silencing Banner's disbelief with a stern glance. The guardsman quickly realized that questioning an Astartes, or assuming they were capable of jest, might not be a wise idea. "And who are you?" Banner hesitantly inquired, punctuating his words with a deferential, "My lord." The Astartes turned towards Banner, his helmeted visage betraying no emotion, yet Banner could feel the weight of the warrior's contemplation. Just as the silence threatened to overwhelm them, the Astartes broke it. "My name is of little consequence to you, mortal," he began, his voice resonating with an aura of authority. "But I am of the Knights Errant, forged by Malcador the hero." The Grey Knight paused, a fleeting shadow crossing his face as he remembered his former master's deeds during the tumult of the Horus heresy. "However," he continued, "we are now known as the Grey Knights. We are the 666th chapter, entrusted with being the final bulwark against the tides of chaos and its infernal minions, known as demons to beings such as yourself." Banner, taken aback by the revelation, found himself inundated with questions, but one pressed to the forefront of his thoughts. "I've never heard of the Grey Knights," Banner admitted, his voice tinged with confusion. The Grey Knight turned away, his stoic demeanor unwavering. After a brief silence, he spoke once more. "And you never will," he intoned cryptically. Startled by the enigmatic response, Banner couldn't help but voice his bewilderment. "What does that mean? You just told me about them. Now I have heard of them. The Grey Knights, I mean." Rushing up to the towering figure, Banner gazed up at him with pleading eyes. The Grey Knight, acknowledging the mortal's aid in the recent battle, recognized a dilemma. While he had proven useful, his newfound knowledge posed a risk. The existence of the warp's malevolent forces must remain concealed, lest they corrupt and consume. This same rationale extended to the Grey Knights themselves. Their secrecy was paramount, their purpose shrouded in mystery. Yet, for now, the mortal's usefulness outweighed the danger. He would spare Banner's life, for the moment. "I have spoken enough," the Grey Knight interjected briskly. "Have you located the girl? I heard her scream just before the entity attacked." Realizing further inquiry would yield little, Banner simply responded, "I've not found anyone, my lord. I'm not even certain I heard her scream." "I am certain she did," the Grey Knight asserted. "My auspices are finely tuned, and they detected it clearly just before the demon assailed us." Banner's heart sank as he realized he was the unwitting source of the scream, not a lost child. But fearful of revealing the truth, he merely nodded and redirected the conversation. "So, what's the plan? Where are we headed?" Banner inquired, hoping to shift focus. The Grey Knight turned to face him, his gaze piercing. "We are not going anywhere. I intend to confront a demon lord, the architect of this invasion, and end it. This is no task for a mortal." Banner, gripped with the fear of abandonment, protested. "You cannot leave me in this place. Anywhere must be better than here. We're stronger together." The plea hung in the air, more a desperate beg than a demand. Yet the guardsman had a point, and the Grey Knight begrudgingly conceded. They would indeed be marginally stronger together. "You are persistent, I'll give you that," the Grey Knight remarked. "You're also foolish, but I concede you may be of some use. What is your name, guardsman?" Banner, feeling a sliver of hope returning, replied without hesitation. "Banner, my lord." "Just Banner?" The Grey Knight's tone was slightly curious. "My apologies. I am Banner Bannerson of House Banner, my lord," Banner clarified. "House?" The Grey Knight's brow furrowed. "Are you noble?" Banner chuckled before responding. "No, my lord. Nothing like that. It's what my family, my parents and my brother Standard, call our business. We're banner weavers, you see, considered one of the best on our world. We've even had the honor of weaving banners for chapters of the mighty Adeptus Astartes." The Grey Knight raised his hand, cutting off Banner's explanation. While perhaps interesting to mortals, it held no value for him. "So, Banner Bannerson, of Banner Weaver Company House Banner. What was your rank in the Militarum? the Grey Knight inquired, already anticipating the response. "I was banner carrier," Banner declared proudly. "First in my family to not only make banners, but also to carry them into battle. A huge honor, because—" The Grey Knight silenced him with a raised hand. "Why am I not surprised?" he mused. "More importantly, where are your weapons? Even banner carriers of the mortal contingent must carry at least a las pistol." Banner's smile faded as he admitted, "I dropped my weapon when I fled." "Do you know what the penalty for desertion is, guardsman?" The Grey Knight's voice took on a new severity. Alarmed by the Grey Knight's use of his designation rather than his name, Banner quickly responded. I did not desert, my lord. The order was given to retreat. We were overwhelmed by the enemy forces holding the city, and in my flight, I lost my weapon." The Grey Knight, well versed in the stratagems of mortals, including the tactical retreat, though it was a maneuver he had never himself employed, only nodded. Considering the tactical disadvantage posed by the mortal's lack of a weapon, he sighed and turned, starting to walk away. Banner realized they were leaving, hastily gathered his belongings, and set off after the transhuman warrior. Despite the lumbering pace of the knight, his stride outmatched that of any mortal, forcing Banner to hurry or even half-run to keep up. As he scurried along, Banner tried to shrink himself, minimizing his presence, a concern the Grey Knight seemed indifferent to. Unlike the transhuman warrior, Banner flinched at every sound, his nerves on edge in the eerie silence of the city, where even the slightest disturbance echoed loudly. "You lost your weapon, but what happened to your banner?" The Grey Knight's question cut through the quiet abruptly. Stunned by the unexpected query, Banner replied in a hushed tone. "It's in my backpack, my lord. I managed to save it when... well, I'd rather not talk about it right now." The Grey Knight halted abruptly, fixing his gaze upon the man. Beneath the impassive facade of his helmet, Banner sensed a deep contemplation. In one fluid motion, the Grey Knight withdrew a dagger from his belt and presented it in his open palm to Banner. The blade was a work of sinister elegance, its dark metal hinting at malevolent purpose. As the man examined it, he couldn't shake the feeling of darkness emanating from the blade, amplified by a subtle bluish gleam and a faint whisper on the wind. Dismissing these sensations as mere figments of his imagination, he refocused on the dagger's details. Its lines tapered gracefully from the guard to the tip, the convergence near the end forming a wicked point. The guard itself bore an intricate S-shape, crafted from a brass-like material that hinted at exotic origins. Wrapped in supple brown leather, the hilt culminated in a small, rounded pommel, completing the blade's ominous allure. Banner hesitated, uncertain if the Grey Knight intended for him to take the weapon or merely examine it. With trembling fingers, he reached out for the blade, relieved when the Grey Knight nodded in approval. In Banner's grasp, the dagger transformed, its proportions expanded to resemble more of a short sword compared to the giant hands of the Grey Knight. "This dagger is an ancient relic," the knight began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "It is unique, and I entrust it to you for the trials ahead. It will serve you well, but you must promise to be careful." Before the Grey Knight could finish his cautionary words, Banner, engrossed in examining the blade, inadvertently lost his grip, and the weapon clattered to the ground. Panic surged through him as he hastily retrieved it, stealing a glance at the Grey Knight, hoping his blunder had gone unnoticed. "Full with it," the Grey Knight concluded with a weary sigh, his gaze piercing through Banner's facade of innocence. The Grey Knight had foreseen Banner's blunder, his heightened senses detecting the subtle tremor in the guardsman's hand long before the weapon slipped from his grasp. He inwardly cursed, suppressing the urge to reprimand the mortal, instead beseeching the Emperor for patience. What grated on him most was not Banner's clumsiness, but his own decision not to intervene, a lapse in judgment that irked him more than the fumbling itself. Banner, acutely aware of the Grey Knight's silent disapproval, clutched the dagger tightly, as though it were a precious treasure. With a nod to his guardian, Banner watched as the Grey Knight turned away, striding purposefully ahead. Though he feared he had disappointed the transhuman warrior, Banner felt a wave of relief wash over him, grateful that the Grey Knight had not berated him, confiscated the weapon, or worse. As the knight strode ahead, Banner trailing behind. Only a few minutes had passed when a jarring clunk disrupted the silence. The knight winced, his pace faltering, realizing that Banner had dropped the dagger once more. Whether it was due to the guardsman's erratic gestures or sheer clumsiness, the transhuman warrior could not determine. "He's but a mortal. Mistakes are inevitable," the Grey Knight muttered, his frustration palpable beneath his helm. Moments later, another clunk echoed through the desolate streets. Whirling around, the Grey Knight observed Banner inadvertently nicking the blade against the rugged edges of a slab of rockcrete. Though unseen beneath his helm, the Grey Knight's scowl deepened at the sight. "Apologies!" Banner's voice rang out, tinged with remorse. "I'll exercise more caution, I swear." Silent and resolute, the Grey Knight pressed forward, ignoring the repeated clanks. However, as the sound persisted, he murmured to himself, "I must not harm the mortal. He comprehends not the gravity of his actions." The march persisted through the city, punctuated by Banner's repeated mishandling of the dagger. Each clang and scrape tested the Grey Knight's patience, his silent prayers to the Emperor growing more fervent with each blunder. Then, amidst the cacophony of missteps, a new, more alarming noise pierced the air. A resounding clang, followed by Banner's jubilant laughter. "By the throne! This blade is extraordinary, my lord!" Banner exclaimed. "You see, I couldn't get past this rockcrete barrier, but I could cut straight through it with the dagger like it's cutting through air." "That's enough!" the Grey Knight thundered, his voice laden with frustration. "This ends now. The Emperor will understand. The Grey Knight's intent to end Banner's clumsy antics was abruptly interrupted by a looming danger he had failed to perceive. As they traversed alongside a mound of rubble, likely the remnants of a fallen edifice, his attention fixated on the hapless guardsman, oblivious to the looming threat. With startling speed, the entity sprang from the debris, hurtling towards the Grey Knight and slamming him to the ground. Instantly, the Space Marine's visor illuminated with warning glyphs, signaling imminent assault and potential breaches in his formidable armor. Struggling to rise against the vicious attack, the transhuman warrior found himself overpowered by the beast's massive frame and relentless onslaught of claws and tentacles. Amidst the chaos, the distant screams of a little girl pierced the air, her presence momentarily spiking the Auspex readings before fading as Banner's voice echoed nearby. "What do I do?" Banner cried out in desperation. "Protect the girl!" The Grey Knight's voice strained against the demon's relentless strikes. Seeing the creature's clawed appendages, the Grey Knight forced himself to one knee, heaving the monstrous entity upwards. But the demon showed no mercy, its ravages intensifying with each passing moment. Tentacles, claws, and wings lashed out with savage fury, engulfing the knight in a whirlwind of violence and agony. Yet, in a sudden twist of fate, the demon's ferocity inexplicably waned, its limbs falling limp as if someone had closed the faucet on an out-of-control water hose. With a mighty heave, the Grey Knight cast the creature aside, its once terrifying form now reduced to a crumpled heap. Turning his gaze to Banner, the Grey Knight beheld the mortal trembling but resolute, the dagger clutched tightly in his grasp, its blade tainted with black, demonic ichor. Did I get it? Is it dead?" Banner's voice quivered with uncertainty. They both glanced at the fallen demon, its twitching form now dissolving into smouldering embers. "You did," the Grey Knight affirmed with a steadfast tone. "The Emperor smiles upon you, Banner Bannerson. Well done." The Space Marine barely finished speaking when Banner, whether due to relief or the ebbing of adrenaline, simply released his grip on the dagger, which clattered to the ground once more. The Grey Knight's gaze fell upon the revered relic, now marred by several microscopic dents and tainted with black gore that defiled its once immaculate surface. "Must not murder the mortal," the Grey Knight muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. "Must he helped me? Again?" Meanwhile, Banner had collapsed to his knees amidst the rubble, his eyes fixed upon the dissolving mass of flesh, claws, and feathers before them. "Was that another demon?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. The question, though its answer seemed obvious to the Grey Knight, momentarily stunned the warrior, lifting the veil of anger that had clouded his thoughts towards the mortal. He turned to Banner and offered a simple nod before striding over to the fallen monstrosity, and leaning over it. "We are getting close to our destination," the Grey Knight intoned in his deep, resonant voice. Banner, having regained his composure, retrieved the dagger and began attempting to wipe it clean against the sleeve of his jacket. "How can you tell, my lord?" Banner inquired, his tone laced with curiosity. "This place looks much the same as everywhere else in this city. And where is everyone?" The Grey Knight turned, his gaze shifting up towards the ridge of rubble. "I can tell, and I don't know," he replied. "You don't know why we're getting closer? Or was that an answer to where everyone is?" Banner quickly fired back. "The latter," the Grey Knight retorted. "So you don't know where everyone is?" Banner queried, inadvertently confusing himself with his own line of questioning. "Could it be the demons?" "There's not enough data to compile such a conclusion," the Grey Knight stated. "However, the theoretical is sound." "Speaking of sound," Banner remarked with a furrowed brow, "is it just me, or is the city eerily quiet?" "You're correct, Banner Bannerson," the Grey Knight acknowledged, his gaze sweeping over the desolate cityscape. "This silence is unnatural. It is as if a veil has been pulled over the entire city, blanketing the sound." "Should we be worried about that?" he inquired, a tinge of concern colouring his voice. The Grey Knight offered no immediate response, instead beginning to ascend the pile of rubble. Realizing he would not receive an answer, Banner secured the dagger as best he could and followed the grey-armoured warrior's lead. The ascent was effortless for the Astartes, akin to strolling across a manicured garden, his movements as fluid as a spider's. Upon reaching the summit, he glanced back, only to find Banner struggling amidst the labyrinth of concrete and debris below. Despite the hindrances, the Grey Knight surmised that the mortal would eventually conquer the ascent unaided. Seizing the moment, he catalogued the available data. Firstly, the city faced an onslaught from chaos. Second, it stood deserted, save for the demonic incursion they had encountered. Yet Banner had mentioned Chaos Astartes, hadn't he? If so, where were they? Thirdly, an eerie stillness enveloped the city, an oppressive silence underscored by a palpable psychic weight. Though Banner remained oblivious to it, the Grey Knight sensed an intrusion upon his mind, a veiling force obscuring his perception. Before the knight could conclude his musings, a weary cry echoed behind him, marking Banner's ascent to the ridge. The guardsman's arrival was heralded by heavy panting, his visage obscured by a film of sweat and dust so thick it seemed deliberate. You made it seem effortless," Banner gasped, his exhaustion palpable. "What's your secret? Is rock climbing part of your Astartes training regimen?" The Grey Knight offered no reply, his gaze fixed upon the city below. From the precipice of rubble, 3 paths sprawled into the city's heart. Each thoroughfare was flanked by structures, their crumbling facades evidence to the fierce battles that had taken place within the city. To the left, a road culminated in a desolate square, its boundaries lost amidst ruins. The middle path snaked deeper into the urban labyrinth, vanishing abruptly around a sharp bend. The rightward route, shrouded in dust and debris, extended into obscurity, its ultimate destination, which seemed to be a square, concealed by the city's detritus. "Which way?" Banner asked, his voice strained as he leaned on his knees, struggling to regain his breath. "We go to the left," the Grey Knight declared. "Great! Why?" Banner retorted. "Because that is the way to our destination," the Grey Knight replied matter-of-factly, his tone unwavering. "Well, that explains it perfectly," Banner muttered, his frustration palpable. "Indeed," the Grey Knight affirmed, unperturbed. With that, the knight resumed his stride, leaving Banner still catching his breath and gesturing in bewilderment before begrudgingly following suit. From the vantage point on the slope, the road to the square had appeared deceptively close. Yet, as they descended, the vastness of the road revealed itself, capable of accommodating several Baneblade tanks in formation. The sheer scale of the city stretched out before them, making the path ahead seem interminable. To make matters worse, what had initially seemed like a smooth road now resembled a labyrinth of debris. Rockcrete remnants, crashed ground cars, and other obstacles littered the way. While the grey-armoured warrior navigated the terrain with seemingly effortless grace, traversing obstacles as though they were mere pebbles, for Banner, Each step became a laborious effort. The struggle to advance through the rubble left him drained and weary, a stark contrast to the relentless pace set by his companion. I have to rest a moment, Banner gasped, his breath laboured and heavy. The Grey Knight, a few strides ahead, pivoted to regard the sweating mortal. Banner's attire, once a light beige, now bore the stains of exertion, darkened by the strain of their journey. Only his verdant breastplate and helmet retained their original green hue, albeit speckled with droplets of sweat. "Very well," the Grey Knight intoned, his voice resonating with authority. "We rest here for a moment." With those words, Banner didn't so much sit as he did fall to the ground, his descent resembling that of a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. Wasting no time, he delved into his backpack, retrieving a flask of water and some sustenance. The Grey Knight, devoid of the need for rest or nourishment, scanned their surroundings for potential threats. His gaze pierced the murky shadow of the building, half expecting malevolent eyes to peer back at him. After a few moments, with his mouth full, Banner then asked, "Why are you here? And why are you alone?" Why are you alone?" "Why do you presume I am alone? There are others with me," the Grey Knight retorted. Puzzled, Banner glanced around, gesturing with his arm. "These others? I can't see them. Are they here with us right now?" The Grey Knight dismissed the query with a scoff. "No, they are not here now, and I don't see them either. But they are here on the planet. 2 full squads." "2 squads?" Banner exclaimed in shock. "Is that all? On the entire planet?" The Grey Knight, failing to grasp the concern, simply affirmed, "Yes." "To stop a global demonic invasion," Banner said, still bewildered. Once more, the Grey Knight replied curtly, "Yes." Baffled by the response, Banner grinned. "You Astartes really think highly of yourselves. You do realize that the city is overrun by human traitors and chaos Astartes, right? What can 2 squads do against that, especially spread out across an entire world?" "Enough," the Grey Knight said, his voice turning ice cold. "Now, get up. We must continue." With that command, the Grey Knight strode forward. Still reeling from the conversation, Banner shook his head before gathering his belongings and jogging to catch up. Banner gauged they were only halfway to the square despite trudging for hours. The pair had reached an intersection in the colossal road. Each corner hosted a building bearing the scars of war, yet one structure suffered far worse than the rest. Its lower levels bore the brunt of explosive shells, riddled with cavities wide enough to admit a convoy. Before it lay a blazing armoured personnel carrier, its flames casting an ominous glow across the vicinity, shrouding every surface in jumping shadows. The pallor of the light hinted at dusk falling, yet the sky remained unchanged, a stagnant vault above, as if time was standing still. Banner's breath caught as he peered into the murky depths of the desolate building, his hand instinctively reaching for the Grey Knight's dagger. Movement stirred within, initially dismissed as a figment of his imagination, but then it came again, unmistakable this time. His grip tightened around the dagger, steadying himself against the shock of what he witnessed. "I don't believe it," Banner murmured, disbelief tainting his voice. "What is it, guardsman?" the Grey Knight inquired, turning to follow Banner's gaze. Emerging from the shadows adjacent to the blazing transport, a young girl approached. Clutching a tattered teddy bear, she appeared to be no more than 9 or 10 cycles old, her countenance worn and weary, strands of unkempt black hair matted with filth. "Ah, you found her!" the Grey Knight exclaimed, his tone edged with relief. "Good work, Banner!" Banner, still grappling with disbelief, turned to the Grey Knight, his words stumbling out in a jumble. But... "Don't just stand there, go get her," the Grey Knight urged. "She needs our help." Banner nodded, his resolve firm as he approached the girl. He drew nearer and called out, his voice gentle and reassuring. "It's okay, little one. We won't hurt you." At first the girl hesitated, retreating a step, But then she tentatively moved towards Banner. As they neared arm's reach, they both halted, a fragile moment hanging between them. "Are you my mummy?" The girl's innocent, frightened voice trembled in the air. Taken aback by the unexpected question, Banner initially thought the girl might have suffered an injury, impairing her perception. "Yes, no," he stuttered. "First of all, I'm a man." A soft clicking noise emitted from the Grey Knight's helmet, a signal that he had reacted somehow, though Banner couldn't discern the nature of the response. The Astartes remained silent, his features hidden behind his stoic helm, devoid of any discernible emotion. "Second, I'm not your mother, not even your parent," Banner continued, his voice tinged with a mix of sympathy and confusion. The little girl's expression saddened, and she cast her gaze downward for a moment. "Well, perhaps you could be my new mummy," she suggested softly. "However, you can't be my daddy." Intrigued, despite having no desire to become a parent, Banner inquired further. "And why's that, little one?" The girl's gaze shifted, her eyes now fixed on the Grey Knight, a hint of mischief dancing in her eyes. "Because I want him to be my daddy." Banner glanced at the Grey Knight, then back at the girl, noting the mischievous grin on her face. She bit her lip, a gesture that seemed oddly mature for a child, striking him as incongruous. However, he attributed it to the trauma she must have endured. "No, he can't be your father," Banner asserted firmly. "He's a warrior, here to protect you from the awful things in the city." As the girl began to stroke her teddy bear, Banner couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping over him. Her innocent gestures somehow felt misplaced, leaving him to wonder if his own mind was playing tricks on him. "He looks so big and strong," the little girl remarked, her voice tinged with a mixture of admiration and fear. "I'm sure he can protect me. I bet he has a big and powerful sword." Banner forced a smile, though inwardly he felt a twinge of discomfort. "Yes, it's quite large," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "Better to kill the monsters with, better to protect you with." The Grey Knight, who had been standing some ways away as not to frighten the little girl, had still heard the whole conversation, and although not a master in human interaction, he had quickly realized the peril. "Banner!" he roared, his voice ringing with urgency. "Get back now! She's not a little girl!" Banner, who had leaned forward to be at head height with the girl, swung around at the Grey Knight and retorted. "Nonsense! She's just an injured little girl. Look how cute she—" But as he turned back towards the girl, his words caught in his throat, and he stumbled backward in shock. The little girl's visage had transformed before his eyes. Where once stood an innocent child, now loomed a hulking demonette, her skin rippling with grotesque movement beneath, her features twisted into a seductive yet nightmarish form. Her facial features bore a twisted semblance of beauty, with pale, almost purple skin, and a shaven skull adorned with a topknot. Her ample bosom was out for display, but that only distracted Banner for a moment from the hoofed feet and terrible pincer and crab-like claws she had for hands. "Oh!" the demonette moaned, her alluring yet raspy voice sending shivers down Banner's spine. "You are no fun, Grey Knight, spoiling my game with the mortals so quickly. Shame on you!" The Grey Knight had started to run towards Banner and the demonette, bellowing, "Banner, duck!" Before the guardsman could react to the Grey Knight's command, the demonette swung her right claw at him, hitting him hard in his stomach and sending him flying back towards the onrushing Grey warrior. Using his transhuman reflexes, the Grey Knight slid on the rocky ground beneath the airborne guardsman, simultaneously swinging his sword, timing it perfectly for the blade to pass underneath Banner, missing him but striking the demonette with full force. A split second later, Banner crashed hard into the ground behind the Grey Knight. However, the knight's swing, which should have sliced the demonette in two, had missed. She'd used her supernatural reflexes to swipe the blade with her left claw, causing it to bite down deep into the ground next to her. With a grin, she stared into the pale blue lenses of the knight's helmet and retorted with another swing of her claw, striking the man with such force that it would have pulverized rockcrete. The Grey Knight flew backwards and landed hard on his stomach, his sword sliding away on the ground out of his grasp. The demonette grinned and bowed deeply at the sprawling Grey Knight, her gaze fixed upon him. "Oh, I'm sorry, my lord. Did that hurt?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. With an evil laugh, she sauntered towards the fallen knight, swaying her hips seductively while eyeing her claw. "To be honest, I thought the knights errant would be more of a match," she said, sounding almost disappointed. "I guess the rumors of Malcador's secret warriors have been greatly exaggerated." She then seized the Grey Knight's right arm as he reached for his sword, effortlessly flipping the armoured warrior onto his back and straddling him, emitting a slight yet disturbingly sensual moan. "The Emperor protects me, demon," the Grey Knight retorted, his voice tinged with anger. "I will send you back to the wretched realm from where you came." The demonette cackled with evil glee, leaning forward and moaning seductively. "Promises, promises. I'm sure you'd love to impale me with that big sword of yours. Perhaps I'd like it as well. But tell me, knight," she almost spat the word, "are you ready to meet him? Your corpse emperor?" As she prepared to strike, the knight sensed her malice and closed his eyes behind his helmet, bracing for the impending blow. Yet, instead of pain, he heard a gasp. Swiftly, he opened his eyes to witness droplets of black ichor splashing against his helm's lenses. Then he saw it, the tip of the dagger protruding from the demonette's chest. She screamed in agony and rage, rising from the Grey Knight and turning to strike at Banner. But before her blow could land, her form dissolved rapidly, vanishing with an echoing screech, leaving behind only burning flakes of ember and dust. "She couldn't even deal with this little dagger," Banner said, his voice trembling yet triumphant. "I doubt she could have handled your big sword, my lord." "She wasn't talking about my weapon, guardsman," the Grey Knight groaned as he rose to his feet. "But well done," he continued. "However, I wouldn't get too cocky if I were you." Banner, his expression proud, glanced at the dagger in his hand. Suddenly, realization dawned on him regarding what the demonette, or little girl, had been referring to. "Oh!" he exclaimed in disgust. "She meant your equipment." The Grey Knight didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to pick up his sword and inspected it. The formidable blade had served him well over the years, but this was the second time in a day that it had failed him. The second time the guardsman had slain his adversary for him. Pride and frustration warred within him, pride for the guardsman's valour and frustration that victory had been snatched from his grasp. Realizing his pettiness, he turned to congratulate the guardsman. To his concern, he found Banner down on one knee, clutching his chest where the demonette had struck him. "She got me good with that swing," Banner groaned, clearly in pain. "Stronger than they look, those things. Whatever are they?" The Grey Knight felt a surge of pity for the valiant mortal and approached him. He leaned down, grasping Banner's shoulder and hoisting him to his feet. "It was a demonette of Slaanesh," the Grey Knight explained. "A filthy, vile temptress from the warp. Can you walk?" Banner, still groaning, responded. "Everything hurts, and I'd rather lie down and rest here for a month or two. But, seeing as that may not be neither a smart nor safe option, I guess I have no choice but to walk." The Grey Knight nodded solemnly. "You're a brave man, Banner Bannerson." "Funny what you can do when your life depends on it," Banner replied, attempting a smile despite his pain. "If she'd killed you, I'm pretty sure she would have done horrible things to me after." He paused, a grim chuckle escaping his lips. "Perhaps not only bad things, but overall bad, I expect." The Grey Knight simply shook his head and said, "She would have forced you to do unspeakable things to sate her desire of lust and blood." "You really need to work on your delivery," Banner remarked with a quizzical tone. "That first part doesn't sound all bad." The Grey Knight's stare bore into Banner, a silent reprimand echoing between them. "Fine," Banner conceded. "Demonettes are all bad." The Grey Knight nodded at the deflated guardsman. "You once more did good work. This is the second time you've saved me, and that puts me in a predicament." Banner, suddenly feeling an onrush of pain again after the change of topic, groaned. "Oh, do tell. The more you talk, the longer I can stand here in agony and do my best not to faint from the pain." Earlier, you reflected over the fact that you'd never heard of the Grey Knights, the man said, his tone turning serious. There is a reason why that is the case. Banner looked up at the Grey Knight, clearly in agony, and grunted. Ah? Seeing Banner's physical distress, the Grey Knight realized that now might not be the time to burden him further with the knowledge that he would have to die to keep the Imperium's secrets about the Warp and its defenders. Even if Banner would understand the necessity, the blow to his morale would be significant. Never mind. It can wait, the knight sighed. Do you feel that you can push on? Banner, hunched over in severe pain, looked up with a mixed expression of pain, confusion, and anger. Does it look like I'm in any shape to travel right now? At least give me a moment. The Grey Knight nodded, but pressed on. The battle with the demonette and her screeching surely will attract more of them. Banner, suddenly alarmed, looked around too quickly and winced as another shot of pain surged up his ribs. Okay, when you put it that way, Banner groaned. I'll do my best, but don't blame me for using the dagger to support myself. The Grey Knight didn't reply, not even with a nod, and he resumed his walking, with Banner limping behind him, each step sending agonizing pain through his body. They'd traversed for only a few minutes, though it felt like an eternity, each stride a battle against agony for Banner and an exercise in frustration for the knight, who felt as if they were barely moving at all. Struggling to contain his pain, Banner posed a question. You said the demonette was of Slan something, he managed, but the big things with the tentacles and wings were demons of Tzatziki? No, Zenith. Are they not the same? The Grey Knight glanced back at Banner, weighing his response carefully. The mortal had already glimpsed too much of the chaotic horrors, yet he had also proven his mettle in combat. Perhaps a modicum of insight wouldn't plunge him into madness. Slanesh and Tzeentch, the Grey Knight sighed, considering how much to reveal. That's exactly what I said, Banner interjected eagerly. But go on. They're gods of chaos, immortal entities from the Warp, the Grey Knight continued, his voice tinged with a grim resolve. They rule in the Warp, where they were born, yet they have always existed. One of them, known as She Who Thirsts, is the goddess of pleasure, pain, and excess. The other, the Lord of Change, is a wicked being that corrupts the thoughts and flesh of men. For all intents and purposes, they are enemies with one another, locked in an eternal battle in the Great Game, where it is prophesied that only one of the four gods will be the victor. However, from time to time, like now, they ally themselves when they see a common and wretched goal. What this goal could be, however, is beyond me at this moment. However, the fact that they've both sent heralds to this place is disturbing. Banner nodded in contemplation, his thoughts weighed down by the gravity of the Grey Knight's words. Yes, those things were quite awful to look at, Banner said, his tone contemplative. At least the Tsanaka one. The Slanushi one had at least some parts that weren't too bad to look at. The Grey Knight shook his head again, a silent rebuke to Banner's unsettling musings. However, the guardsman's expression quickly shifted. Wait a minute, Banner continued, his curiosity piqued. You said 4 Chaos Gods. Slan whatever and Zinash are only 2 of them. Who are the other 2? Do they have minions here as well? You ask too many and too dangerous questions, the Grey Knight retorted, his voice cutting through the air like a frosty wind. All I will say is that based on my experience, it is unlikely that this world would attract more than the 2. However, if I'm wrong, you best pray to him on Terra for protection, for if that's the case, we're dealing with something beyond even my abilities. Banner shuddered at the thought, his mind conjuring nightmarish images of what the other Chaos Gods might entail. Since he had nothing concrete to go by, he imagined their names as Frag and Glurg. The names, though arbitrary, seemed fitting. Trying to envision Frag, Banner pictured a monstrous creature with red eyes, jagged teeth, fluffy ears, and a tail, akin to a colossal rabbit. It took him a moment to realize the absurdity of his imagination and cast the thought aside. Turning to Glurg, he rolled the word around his mind, conjuring images of decay, rot, and perverse vitality. His vision of Glurg was a paradoxical mixture of life and death, joy and suffering. Little did Banner know how close he was to the reality of the true chaos entity Nurgle, besides its actual name, of course. a revelation that would forever remain hidden from him. Chapter 5. The duo's journey toward the square continued, navigating through the labyrinth of rubble with relative ease. However, their progress was abruptly halted as they came upon a towering, windowless wall that stretched 50 meters high, obstructing the entire street. The wall, once part of a building, had been reduced to rubble at its base, likely the result of heavy bombardment. Its lack of windows or entrances suggested it might have served as an administratum or mechanicus facility, where views of the outside world were deemed superfluous to requirements. The Grey Knight had spotted the obstacle from their earlier vantage point, yet even his enhanced senses struggled to fully comprehend its scale from afar. Banner glanced apprehensively at the knight. "You may be able to scale that," Banner suggested. "Or perhaps even jump over it, but I will not." "I doubt I can even scale that," the Grey Knight replied. "We must find a way around." With a sigh of relief, Banner nodded, and they veered off into a side passageway in search of an alternate route that could lead them to their intended destination. "This dagger?" Banner inquired, holding the blade aloft. With each careful movement, Banner grew more accustomed to the weight and balance of the weapon. "It seems very powerful," he continued, "cutting through demons and anything else as though they were paper. What is it?" The Grey Knight, steadfast in his stride and forward gaze, responded in a monotone voice. "It's an ancient and unique relic that—" But Banner cut him off abruptly. Yes, he interjected. "You've mentioned that already, but where's it from? What is it, really?" Pressing on without breaking pace, the Grey Knight took a moment before posing his own question. "Why do you wish to know?" Banner shrugged. "I'm curious, that's all," he explained. "It's saved us twice now, and seems to hold significant power. I'd like to know why." The Grey Knight halted abruptly, pivoting to face Banner. "If you must know," he began, his voice weighted with the burden of memory, "this dagger, I forged it over a century ago. It came to be after a harrowing campaign on a desolate world near the Eye of Terror, consumed by the warp itself. The infestation went unnoticed for 15 years until the planet's tides failed to arrive. A diplomatic mission was dispatched, but they never returned, save for a haunting astropathic message foretelling the planet's demise. In response, Terra dispatched a crusader fleet with Astartes battleships and Grey Knights to reclaim or purge the world, but they vanished without a trace as well." Banner, hanging on every word, noticed the Grey Knight's pause. "And then?" Banner prompted eagerly. "What happened?" "The Administratum deemed it too costly to send another expedition," the Grey Knight continued, his voice grave. "But the Grey Knights are beholden only to the Emperor. We demanded answers, and ventured forth to uncover the truth. What we found was worse than anyone could have imagined. The fleet had been annihilated, and our brethren slaughtered, their blood drained and forged into an ingot, a key component in a blasphemous trial to create a weapon of unimaginable power. By the Emperor's grace, I seized the ingot, but many of my brothers paid with their lives to secure my escape. For decades, we purified it of its taint, forging this steel into a dagger, this weapon of redemption forged from the souls of fallen heroes." As the Grey Knight spoke, Banner's awe mingled with horror, until suddenly a wave of revulsion overtook him. Without hesitation, he flung the dagger to the ground with force. "Are you saying—" Banner's voice trembled with shock. "This dagger's made from people? You could have warned me. That's horrendous!" The Grey Knight's response crackled with a blend of anger and disbelief. "That entire saga of heroes, demons, and the terrors beyond your ken," he began, his voice tinged with frustration. "And yet it's the origin of the dagger that gives you pause?" Banner's expression shifted to one of shame as he walked over to retrieve the weapon from where it lay among the rocky debris. Cradling the dagger in his hand, he noticed the ethereal blue shimmer dancing across its surface, a sight he was now certain wasn't mere illusion. "I see now why dropping the dagger a few times—" 26 times, the Grey Knight corrected, his tone firm, "including this one." "Fine, allegedly more than a few times," Banner conceded. "I understand now the offense it may have caused you, my lord. I am truly sorry." "The valor you've shown with the weapon outweighs your clumsiness," the Grey Knight conceded. "Just try to keep a tighter grip on it from now on." Banner nodded, lifting the dagger into the dim light for closer scrutiny. The movement sent a sharp twinge through his ribs, a harsh reminder of his injury, and he stumbled, nearly dropping the dagger once more. Feeling the weight of the Grey Knight's disapproving gaze, Banner steadied himself, acutely aware of his recent near mishap. "I'll exercise greater care, my lord," Banner promised, his voice tinged with gratitude for the trust bestowed upon him. The Grey Knight acknowledged the pledge with a barely perceptible nod, resuming his march forward. Banner released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, relieved that the Grey Knight had accepted his apology. The collapsed edifice diverted them farther from the thoroughfare leading to the square, necessitating an alternate route. "How much farther, do you reckon?" Banner inquired. "I do not know," the Grey Knight said. "But we'll reach it soon, right?" he pressed. "I do not know," came the steadfast reply. "It can't be too distant, surely. We've been marching for hours," Banner persisted. "I do not—" Banner interjected before the Grey Knight could finish. "Let me guess, you do not know." Mocking the Grey Knight's deep resonance, Banner's mimicry halted the Astartes in his tracks. With a piercing gaze, the Grey Knight regarded Banner. "Keen observation, guardsman. Perhaps you possess latent psychic talents," the Grey Knight remarked. "Do you know what we do with psychers?" Resuming his stride, the Grey Knight left Banner to ponder his quip, arms hanging at his side. Yet, upon reflection, Banner couldn't contain himself. "Wait a minute, was that a jest?" Banner exclaimed. "Do your kind even comprehend humor?" His question hung in the air, met only by the Grey Knight's silent march. Undeterred, Banner launched into a string of feeble attempts at humor, each falling flat against the Grey Knight's unyielding armor. As they pressed on, they found their path once more obstructed, this time by a makeshift barricade comprised of stacked land cars and reinforced with heavy metal plates. The knight surveyed the blockade, his voice tinged with frustration. "We cannot breach this obstacle. We must seek another path," he declared. To their left loomed a battered building, its structure rent by artillery or some infernal warp weaponry. Despite its precarious condition, the breaches in its walls offered a passage forward. With no alternative in sight, the Grey Knight gestured towards the yawning aperture and set forth, Banner trailing in his wake. Within the shadowed confines of the building, darkness enveloped them, tainted by the lingering scent of smoke and ozone, an aftertaste of the violent clashes that had torn through its halls. Furniture lay in ruins, haphazardly piled to form crude barriers, evidence of a desperate last stand. Laths and bolter marks marred the walls, testament to the ferocity of the fight that had unfolded within. While the Grey Knight navigated the rubble with ease, Banner's progress was hindered by his injuries, each step a struggle. I must rest a moment," Banner gasped, his strength waning. The Grey Knight cast a brief glance at the mortal, who collapsed without waiting for acknowledgement. Despite his frailty, the guardsman's courage earned a measure of respect from the Grey Knight. In that moment, he realized he had come to view Banner not merely as a fellow traveler, but as a companion, a rare bond for one of his kind to form with a mortal. Yet he remained cautious, mindful of the inherent limitations and vulnerabilities of humanity. Before he could delve further into his thoughts, a pained groan from Banner drew his attention, the guardsman clutching his wounded side once more. "How are your injuries?" inquired the Grey Knight. Banner, grimacing, unfastened the side of his chest armor and raised his shirt, revealing a bruised torso mottled with dark hues where the demonette's blows had landed. The Grey Knight knelt beside him, inspecting the damage. "You have 2 broken ribs, but there is no sign of internal bleeding," he observed. "Only 2, Banner replied with a wry tone. "I could have sworn it was every bone in my body." The Grey Knight rose to his full height, regarding the guardsman with a measured gaze. "By all rights they should have been, considering the fights you've been through today," he remarked solemnly. "The Emperor truly protects." Banner managed a faint grin. "If I'm protected, I dread to think of the injuries I'd have without it. You wouldn't have needed a body bag, just a sponge and jars. Plural." "That is a common practice in the field," the Grey Knight replied matter-of-factly. "Apothecaries often collect only enough to make a DNA match. In particularly gruesome conflicts, such tests are impossible, as they can't discern where one soldier ends and another begins. Banner's expression turned to one of horror, realizing the gravity of the situation. His attempt at humor had backfired, and he felt a chill run down his spine. "How are you feeling, Guardsman? You look pale," remarked the Grey Knight, concern lacing his words. "Just give me a moment," Banner requested, drawing in a deep breath. However, the inhalation disturbed his damaged ribs, sending another wave of pain coursing through his side. After a few minutes had passed, during which Banner managed to shake off the grim thoughts of the battlefield horrors he had unwittingly conjured, the pain in his side persisted, a constant reminder of the day's brutal encounters, yet it had dulled to a bearable ache. Meanwhile, the Grey Knight maintained his vigilant stance, his gaze darting from one shadowed corner to the next in a ceaseless watch. Seated on the floor, Banner struggled against the urge to succumb to exhaustion. He knew that yielding to sleep could either offer a brief respite or seal his fate. With grim resolve, he fought against the fatigue, mindful of the perils that lurked in sleep's embrace. Yet, despite his efforts, Banner felt the tendrils of sleep creeping ever closer. Just as his eyelids began to droop, a subtle tremor rippled through the floor beneath him. Instantly alert, he scanned their surroundings for any sign of movement. The tremor subsided, only to be swiftly succeeded by a stronger quake. A shiver ran down Banner's spine, his thoughts hearkening back to the unearthly rumblings that heralded the emergence of their first demonic encounter earlier in the day. Though these tremors bore a familiar cadence, there was an unsettling difference in their intensity and rhythm, escalating with each passing moment. "Hey!" Banner's urgent cry pierced through the air, echoing off the trembling walls of the building. As if in response to his words, the very structure began to convulse around them, a violent tremor shaking loose debris from its weakened frame. "It's an earthquake!" The Grey Knight's voice rang out with authority amidst the chaos. "This edifice is on the brink of collapse. We must evacuate. At once!" With swift determination, Banner scrambled to his feet, his movements mirroring the Grey Knight's as they navigated a hasty retreat through the labyrinthine corridors. Yet, in the frantic rush, Banner's heart sank as he realized he'd forgotten the dagger, left behind where he'd rested. "The dagger! It's back there!" Banner's distress was palpable, his voice strained with regret. Before the Grey Knight could respond, Banner had already pivoted, racing back towards the peril they had narrowly escaped. The building groaned and trembled around them, threatening to falter at any moment. Rockcrete debris rained down from the ceiling, and cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, ominous harbingers of imminent collapse. Surveying their surroundings with a seasoned eye, the Grey Knight spied an arched doorway amidst the chaos. It appeared structurally sound, devoid of the fissures that marred the rest of the building. Beyond it lay a cavernous chamber, seemingly untouched by the seismic upheaval. "This way!" the Grey Knight shouted, his voice a fervent command amidst the turmoil. As the Grey Knight's directive echoed through the tumult, a tremendous fissure tore through the floor beside the arch, foreboding of the archway's weakening structural integrity. With grim resolve, he comprehended that even their last bastion was compromised by the quake's wrath. Reacting with lightning reflexes born of his Astartes physiology, he dashed to the arch, pivoting to confront the impending disaster. With a primal roar, the Grey Knight thrust against the apex of the archway, his sinewy form straining against the weight of the crumbling wall. Transcending mortal limitations, he held firm, his superhuman strength staunching the deluge of rubble that threatened to entomb Banner within the crumbling chamber. Through the haze of dust and debris, he glimpsed Banner retrieving the dagger, the precious artifact narrowly avoiding destruction as a colossal slab of rockcrete thundered down in its place. "I got it!" Banner's voice, muffled by the din of destruction, pierced through the chaos, laden with relief and choked by the billowing dust. "I have the dagger!" Faced with the mortal's peril, the Grey Knight bellowed a command, his voice reverberating through the tumult like a clarion call of salvation. "Guardsmen, run! Run as if the hounds of hell were at your heels!" Despite the Grey Knight's thunderous command echoing in the chaos, Banner needed no further urging. Gripping the dagger tightly to his chest, he bolted forward, a desperate sprint to escape the falling ceiling that threatened to ensnare him. Every stride was a battle against the crumbling building, his free hand raised to shield his face and head from the relentless barrage of rubble. A colossal slab crashed down mere inches from his path, but with a swift leap, Banner vaulted onto its surface, his flight uninterrupted amidst the destruction. The air was thick with choking dust, obscuring his vision as he pressed onward, each step a gamble in the dance of survival. "Run!" The Grey Knight's voice, A beacon of urgency amidst the cacophony spurred him onward, driving him ever closer to salvation. Bounding forward, Banner maneuvered deftly through the treacherous maze of falling or fallen debris, each step bringing him closer to the knight's stalwart presence. Yet as he drew near, a grim realization dawned upon him. His companion's strength was waning, his knees buckled beneath the weight of the collapsing wall. No longer merely supporting the arch with his arms, the Grey Knight now bore the burden upon his broad shoulders, his mighty form bearing the weight of the structure like a modern-day Atlas shouldering the burden of the world. With the air thick with dust and the deafening roar of destruction, Banner pressed on, his goal within reach. But fate intervened in a shower of stone and agony as a slab crashed down beside him, the impact grazing his arm and sending him tumbling to the unforgiving ground. A cry of pain tore from his lips as he collapsed amidst the swirling dust, his vision obscured by choking haze rendering him blind to his surroundings. "Banner, get up!" The Grey Knight's voice pierced through the swirling dust. With tears of agony and terror streaming down his face, Banner let out a guttural cry, his voice raw with despair. "Go! Save yourself! I won't make it!" "You will make it!" The Grey Knight's response thundered forth, strained yet resolute. "It is not your fate to die here! Now move your body, guardsman! The Emperor demands it!" Whether it was the Grey Knight's words or the divine will of the Emperor upon his golden throne, something ignited within Banner, infusing him with a newfound resolve. He grit his teeth and began to crawl towards the sound of the Grey Knight's voice, oppressive dust veiling his senses and the groaning of the structure around him threatening to envelop him. As the building threatened to collapse, Banner prayed that his desperate crawl led him in the right direction. Then, suddenly, a heavy weight enveloped his arm, and for a heart-stopping moment he feared his hand had been crushed beneath a falling slab. But then he felt a powerful tug and was wrenched from the ground, hurled through the archway and into the other chamber, the Grey Knight following in his wake. In a display of unmatched strength, the Grey Knight had braced the collapsing archway, snatched Banner from the jaws of death, and propelled them both to safety just before the passage succumbed to ruin. Drained from the harrowing escape and struggling to draw breath through lungs clogged with dust, Banner gasped for air. "Let's not do that again," he cried out, his voice ragged with exhaustion. For the first time since Banner had encountered him, even the Grey Knight was gasping, his breaths heavy and laboured. "Agreed," he wheezed between each breath. They remained sprawled on the floor, the tremors gradually ebbing away as the walls settled back into their silent vigil. After a time, the Grey Knight seemed to regain his strength, rising to his feet with the ease of a warrior accustomed to adversity. His gaze fell upon the collapsed archway, now resembling a shattered monument to their narrow escape. Though Banner still needed moments to gather himself, he managed to drag his weary body to the nearest wall, slumping against it with his arms outstretched, the weight of their recent ordeal pressing heavily upon him. "What just happened?" Banner asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I haven't felt anything like that quake on this planet since I got here. I studied the maps before we landed. This is supposed to be in a stable zone. There aren't any fault lines or volcanoes for thousands of kilometers." "I fear this was caused by our enemy," the Grey Knight said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "Perhaps some manifestation of the evil deeds they've come here to enact." "So this wasn't a natural occurrence?" Banner questioned, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. The Grey Knight nodded solemnly. "Indeed. Whatever caused this must mean the demons are getting closer to their goal. We must hurry." "I still need a moment," Banner interjected, catching his breath. Impatient but understanding, the Grey Knight nodded, forcing himself to remain composed. "How is your arm?" he inquired. "Well, a huge rock fell on it, so what do you think?" Banner replied sarcastically. "I don't think it's broken, but I don't think I'll be playing any racquetball anytime soon, and there'll be one heck of a bruise tomorrow." The Grey Knight simply nodded again, then shifted his attention to Banner's previous evasion. "How did you end up here, Banner? You never answered me before when I asked." Banner, taken aback by the question, sighed deeply before his gaze drifted into the distance. The Grey Knight sensed the weight of painful memories burdening the mortal, but before he could retract the question, Banner began to recount his tale. Chapter 6. 2 days earlier. Banner trudged through the pre-prepared trenches, flanked by a squad of Cadian soldiers from the 142nd Company, the chilly morning air biting at his face. Rain had fallen during the night, flooding the trenches and transforming the packed soil into a mire. He glanced down at his once spotless attire, now besmirched by splashes of mud, and grimaced. It would take ages to clean them properly. His gaze then shifted to the banner, its fabric fluttering gently in the cold breeze, untouched by the mud that marred the ground. It remained as pristine as the day it was fashioned. Suddenly, a voice rang out in the distance. "Banner bearer! Bannerson! Over here!" The voice beckoned from another trench, emanating from the command area of the network. Banner promptly turned and made his way towards it. The past few days had been a monotonous waiting game, but today Banner sensed a shift in the air. Rumors circulated via Voxcast hinting at impending orders for a counteroffensive against traitor forces spotted in a nearby city. While the city's defenders held their ground, the addition of Cadian reinforcements promised to crush the traitors' resistance. "We've received our orders," announced the Cadian captain as Banner and his squad approached. "We're finally moving out." "So the rumors were true, Captain?" Banner inquired, his eagerness palpable. "Indeed," the captain confirmed, though with a hint of displeasure. "While I'd prefer our operation to remain confidential until I decree otherwise, yes, we're bound for the city to bolster its defenses. Perhaps we'll finally see some action on this Emperor-forsaken rock." Those were the words the warriors behind Banner had yearned for. They were seasoned veterans of the eternal conflict, knowing well that war often meant prolonged stretches of waiting for fleeting moments of combat. Yet they craved it, eager to confront the enemy head-on. These soldiers were a precious asset to the Imperium, remnants of the valiant defenders of Cadia, scattered across the stars when the planet fell to Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade. Though they had not been present during Cadia's final stand, they were still Cadians to the core, driven by a fervent desire to avenge their fallen world. Banner, unlike his fellow soldiers, hailed from another world, yet he had been entrusted with the sacred duty of bearing their company's standard due to his skill as a banner weaver. While most Cadians preferred las rifles over flags, Banner had embraced his role with honor. He had been conscripted into the Astra Militarum when traitorous forces threatened his homeworld's neighboring system. Despite his initial reluctance, Banner's father had instilled in him the importance of serving the Imperium, proud that his son would carry their family's legacy into battle, not just weave it. "In 1 hour and 20 minutes, we march," declared the captain. "We'll be reinforced by the 381st Armored. That means tanks and APCs, ladies and gentlemen. No need to trudge to battle on foot." The squad saluted the captain with the sign of the Aquila. Banner, bearing the standard, offered a half sign with a single hand, his resolve unwavering. Exactly 1 hour and 20 minutes later, the 142nd had mustered into the waiting armored transports, a force exceeding 300 warriors, encompassing tank crews, auxiliary staff, and dutiful servitors. They had been briefed that the journey would span roughly 10 hours, necessitating a single stop along the route. This strategic halt assured their arrival at the city by early morning, a calculated maneuver by their command. Initially, superiors had contemplated a nocturnal push, yet the prospect of a nighttime rendezvous with the city's defenders had been deemed too perilous. Moreover, recent Vox transmissions had reassured command that the defenders maintained their positions, obviating the need for immediate reinforcement. The APC designated for Banner and his squad, an abbreviation for Armored Personnel Carrier, gleamed with a freshly minted luster, a product straight from the forge lines. However, its interior lacked the creature comforts one might hope for. The tech adepts of the Mechanicus, ever devoted to their machine spirits, seemed indifferent to the notion of padded seating or sound dampening. As the squad embarked, Banner secured the standard and settled into his seat. In mere moments, the rumble of the mighty engines roared to life, engulfing the compartment in a cacophony so deafening that communication among the soldiers became a challenge, relegated to shouts or hand signals. The convoy surged forward, its pace a tumultuous blend of speed and turbulence that jostled Banner and his comrades within the troop carrier's tight confines. Despite the urgency of their journey, the bumpy road caused Banner to find himself torn between a desire for the driver to slow down and a yearning to arrive at their destination. "Oi, Bannerson!" Acadian called out to Banner above the roar of the engines. You ready for this? Ain't had much taste of combat, have you? Though stung by the implication, Banner maintained his composure. Seen enough. I'm ready, he replied evenly. If you say so, the Cadian retorted with a smirk. But just remember, it's fine to soil your britches when some mutated aura comes charging. Just don't drop that standard, got it? Laughter erupted among the soldiers, and Banner, recognizing the jest to be on behalf of his green combat experience, offered a wry smile. To his relief, the Cadian who had taunted him softened, delivering a reassuring pat on the shoulder. We got your back, the Cadian assured him. City's crawling with traitor scum, but they're disorganized. Human mostly. We'll keep you safe. Besides, with all this armor backing us, it's practically a walk in the park. Can't say the same for my first drop. The Cadian's voice trailed off, a hint of introspection coloring his words. Sensing the weight of unspoken memories, Banner refrained from prying further. He understood that the Cadians had faced harrowing trials and left their stories often unspoken. As the first day of travel drew to a close, much to Banner's relief, the convoy halted to establish camp. With sore muscles and aching bones, Banner welcomed the respite, knowing they were now a mere 2 hours from their destination. The landscape had shifted noticeably, the looming silhouette of the Hive City now dominating the eastern horizon. And to Banner's satisfaction, proper roads now led the way. At least the ride will be smoother, he muttered to himself. A thought that lasted all of 2 seconds until he saw the shelled roads and a dark shroud hanging over the city, mingled with the ominous haze of black smoke billowing from fires below. After a meagre meal, Banner and his squad roamed the camp until they encountered the captain. Any news, Captain? Banner inquired. Ah, Bannerson, the captain responded. No fresh intel, I'm afraid. Vox transmissions are jammed. The Mechanicus adept in charge of the Voxcaster blames it on some meteorological anomaly or the like. His explanation was lost on me, I'm afraid. Typical cogboys, a female soldier chimed in. A chorus of agreement rippled through the squad, eliciting a faint smile from the captain. In any case, the captain continued, we proceed as planned. Get some rest. We move out at first light, aiming for the western gates of the city. With nods and murmurs of acknowledgement, the soldiers dispersed, returning to their transports for much-needed rest. Before settling in, Banner cast his gaze once more upon the distant city. Bathed in the glow of distant fires against the backdrop of night, a sense of unease nagged at him. But he dismissed it, reminding himself that, as the Cadians had said, this mission was a walk in the park. Before dawn's light kissed the horizon, the soldiers roused from their makeshift beds, armed themselves, and loaded into the transports once more. Within the confines of the armoured carrier, Banner felt the palpable surge of anticipation coursing through the troops. It wasn't fear that gripped them, but rather an eager readiness to meet the impending battle head-on. Veterans meticulously checked their weapons and gear, ensuring every laspack was charged and every essential stowed securely in their packs. Banner mirrored their preparations, taking special care to ensure the standard was immaculate and ready for display. An hour into the journey, the convoy ground to a halt. Consulting his chronograph, Banner realized they had reached their destination. Abruptly, the transport's Voxcaster crackled to life, broadcasting the captain's command for all to disembark. The order was clear. They would proceed on foot into the city. Stepping out of the carrier, Banner found himself dwarfed by the looming presence of the city's massive walls. What had seemed a mere line on the horizon the day prior now rose nearly 100 meters into the sky before him. Though scarred by the ravages of weapons fire, the structure appeared resilient, a promising sign in the face of their mission. Reports had indicated they would face little more than cultists and traitors, armed with improvised weaponry, perhaps a handful of renegade guardsmen with access to minor ordnance. Before the convoy loomed a colossal gate, its immense size capable of accommodating even a Titan's passage. With a groan of gears and pistons, the gate slowly creaked open, a testament to the Mechanicus and mastery over machinery. To Banner, witnessing such a massive structure in motion was a marvel in itself, though he reminded himself that, compared to the Emperor's god machines, this was a mere trifle. The complexities of Titan construction dwarfed the simple act of opening a gate. As the gate swung wide, granting passage to the 142nd Company, their initial optimism waned. The city, once shielded behind its imposing walls, revealed a scene of devastation beyond. Buildings lay in ruins, engulfed in flames or reduced to rubble. The streets, once orderly, were now strewn with debris and detritus. A strange, acrid scent hung heavy in the air, reminiscent of sulphur and decay. "This looks far worse than anything those traitor guards could have wrought," Acadian remarked behind Banner, echoing the sentiment shared by many among the company. Stranger still, their expected allies were nowhere to be found, and the eerie silence enveloped the entire city like a shroud. "Where is everyone?" another Cadian voiced, the question weighing heavily on Banner's mind also. A sense of unease gnawed at Banner's gut as he scanned the desolate streets. The absence of life, both friend and foe, was unsettling. For nearly an hour, the convoy pressed deeper into the heart of the city, the tension mounting with each passing minute. Banner and his squad hastened to the command vehicle, where the captain, perched atop a Lehman Russ battle tank, surveyed their surroundings. Despite the rumbling of the tank's engines drowning out any attempt at conversation, the captain's urgent message came through via a Vox amplifier.
"No news reports. Voxcaster still down. This reeks of a trap,"
the captain's amplified voice echoed. Banner acknowledged the order with a nod, his senses heightened as they returned to their positions, keeping close to their APC, eyes peeled for any sign of danger lurking around them. As the convoy rumbled into a vast square, Banner's instinct screamed danger. The open space, while accommodating, felt like a trap waiting to snap shut, with every exit save the one they entered sealed off by debris or deliberate obstructions.
"I don't like the look of this,"
Acadian's voice echoed Banner's apprehension. Before the words fully left the soldier's lips, the sharp crack of a las rifle shattered the air. A comrade up ahead staggered and fell, a smoking hole in his chest.
"Contact!"
The captain's voice boomed over the Vox, urgency thick in the air.
"Enemy forces closing in!"
In the chaos that followed, the square erupted into a battlefield. Traitorous assailants emerged from hidden corners, their weapons blazing. Panic tinged Banner's voice as he struggled to make sense of the situation. They're everywhere!" he shouted, desperation creeping into his tone. "Where did they all come from?" A seasoned Cadian, undaunted by the chaos, grinned with grim determination.
"This is what we call a target-rich environment, Bannerson. Just keep firing. They're charging at us with clubs for the Emperor's sake."
Banner surveyed the scene, realizing the grim truth. The Cadian's assessment was accurate. Most of the advancing traitors brandished primitive melee weapons, charging recklessly across the open expanse. They were met with a hail of lasfire from the disciplined troops and the relentless barrage of the armored column. Even Banner managed to claim a few traitors with his lasgun. Just as victory seemed within reach, a new horror emerged. The cacophony of lasfire was joined by the thunderous roar of bolters. Dread washed over the Imperial troops as figures clad in black power armor materialized from the shadows of the square. Their armor, a twisted mockery of the Emperor's design, dripped with brass embellishments and gruesome adornments. With merciless efficiency, they slaughtered both traitor and loyalist alike.
"Traitor Astartes!"
the captain's voice thundered over the Vox.
"Tanks! Engage at will! Bring them down, quickly!"
The air split with the thunderous boom of heavy-caliber shells, each explosion reverberating through the square like a death knell. Banner grimly noted that while a few shells found their mark, too many Chaos Marines still advanced undeterred. With each step, they drew closer to the convoy, their weapons spitting death with every discharge, cutting down guardsmen and rending armored vehicles asunder. Above the chaos, the captain's voice pierced through the din, shouting orders over the Vox amplifier, but his words were abruptly silenced by the deafening roar of a massive explosion. Banner watched in horror as the captain's tank erupted in a ball of fire, consumed by the inferno of traitor munitions. "We need to withdraw!" a young Acadian trooper yelled, his voice tinged with urgency. "Banner, take point! We'll cover the retreat!" Banner, stunned by the sudden turn of events, found himself momentarily rooted to the spot before urgency spurred him into action. He bolted towards the square's entrance, his heart pounding with dread. Yet as he neared the threshold, an even greater horror unfurled before his eyes. Amidst the expanse of the battlefield, primal roars echoed through the air, drowning out the cacophony of explosions. Through the wreckage of barricades lumbered grotesque creatures, nightmare amalgamations of limbs, mouths, and eyes. Initially mistaking them for Xenos, Banner watched in horror as they tore through the Imperial lines with unnatural speed, shrugging off even the heaviest of weapons as if they were nothing. His blood ran cold at the sight, driving him into a frenzied retreat, his squad close behind. As they raced towards the safety of the exit, a deafening explosion rocked the ground, sending debris hurling into the air. A nearby building crumbled, blocking their path. "They're sealing us in!" a panicked Cadian shouted. Their escape thwarted, Banner scanned the chaos for an alternate route. Amidst the dust and smoke, he spotted a burning APC down a narrow thoroughfare and dashed towards it to seek cover, his comrades covering his retreat as they fought to hold back the tide of horrors behind him. Chapter 7. Cracks in the Facade. Banner's voice faltered as he recounted his harrowing journey, the weight of his experiences evident in the tremor of his words. The Grey Knight listened in stoic silence, his gaze unwavering. "From the APC I ran," Banner continued, his voice strained with emotion, "alone through the city until I got to a smaller square, where I hid to rest for a moment. That's where you showed up, and the rest you know." The Grey Knight absorbed the tale with a solemn nod, acknowledging Banner's ordeal. "Wait here, Banner Bannerson," he instructed, his voice steady. "Rest. I will scout ahead and return shortly." Tears welled in Banner's eyes as he looked at the Grey Knight, his anguish palpable. "Is that all I get?" he cried out. "You know, I could really use a hug right now." But the Grey Knight, ever distant, turned away without a word, striding purposefully out of the room. Banner's plea hung in the air, unanswered. "So no hug?" Banner muttered to himself, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "I can understand that, but this was really traumatic, you know. I might need therapy. A handshake could help at least, or at least a word of encouragement. Another nod, maybe?" With a sigh, Banner resigned himself to the Astartes' indifference. "Astartes," he whispered bitterly. "Great warriors. Awful humans. If they can even be called human." As Banner settled back, exhaustion tugging at his senses, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He tensed, but then dismissed it as a mere trickery of the shadows, allowing weariness to claim him once more. As the Grey Knight pressed through the shattered edifice, he couldn't shake the realization of their narrow escape. Amidst the rubble and ruin, their refuge stood as a lone bastion amidst the devastation. Climbing through the debris, he ascended a precarious slope, navigating the terrain to gain a higher vantage point. From this elevated perch, the city sprawled before him, its once proud streets now marred by destruction. Surveying the thoroughfares, the Grey Knight's keen eye discerned the telltale signs of collapse, fissures snaking through the earth like scars of war. Yet, amidst the seemingly random fractures, a more sinister truth emerged. Demonic symbols, etched into the cracked earth, spoke of dark rituals and unholy machinations. "This was no mere earthquake," the Grey Knight murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "These markings bear the taint of the warp, a harbinger of demonic incursion. But to what end? What foul purpose drives the denizens of the warp to defile this realm?" The Grey Knight navigated the shattered halls with purpose, eventually locating Banner amidst the debris. As he stepped into the room, Banner's eyes snapped open, brimming with a mixture of frustration and defiance. "I've charted our path through this ruin," the Grey Knight announced, his voice resonating with authority. Banner, arms crossed in a display of stubbornness, retorted, "How are your injuries, Banner? My injuries? They're just peachy, thanks for the concern." Ignoring Banner's childish retort, the Grey Knight regarded him with a steely gaze before issuing his command. "It's time to depart." With a resigned sigh, Banner gathered his belongings, donned his armor, and rose to his feet, ready to face whatever awaited them beyond the shattered walls. Traversing the path laid out by the knight, they soon arrived at the vantage point once more. Banner surveyed the cityscape, letting out an impressed whistle. "Look at that! Those cracks, they look almost like markings of some kind," he remarked, gesturing towards the fractured earth below. The Grey Knight regarded Banner with a mixture of surprise and intrigue. While the mortal's observation was astute, it hinted at a deeper understanding than he had anticipated. "Indeed," the Grey Knight affirmed. "They bear the semblance of markings, likely not of natural origin. My suspicion is that the seismic event was not a mere geological tremor." "Demon magic, perhaps?" Banner speculated, his tone tinged with curiosity. Possible, the Grey Knight conceded, his gaze scanning the city below. But the true nature and purpose of these symbols eludes me. We'll uncover the truth, Banner resolved, his determination evident. With a nod, the Grey Knight began their descent, Banner following closely. Energized by his brief respite, the guardsmen navigated the debris with newfound agility. Reaching the bottom, they realized that the markings were only discernible from above. At ground level, they appeared as ordinary cracks in the earth, their true nature concealed from those below. Their journey along the road toward the square proved to be as deceptive as their initial assessment. What appeared to be a short distance stretched far beyond their expectations. Hindered once again by the rubble, exacerbated by the recent quake's aftermath, they pressed on. After a laborious 2 hours, they finally arrived at the outskirts of the square. The expansive area lay before them, encircled by towering structures bearing the scars of conflict. Some edifices stood more ravaged than others, evidence of a cataclysmic battle that had unfolded. Yet, amidst the telltale signs of warfare, craters, spent casings, wrecked vehicles, there was a conspicuous absence. Bodies. There were no corpses or even limbs, only blood. At the heart of the square loomed a colossal structure reminiscent of ancient Terra's colosseums, its circular form matching the perimeter but dwarfing it in sheer magnitude. In typical imperial fashion, the edifice was adorned with macabre embellishments. Skulls, picked casters, vox systems, installed, no doubt, to accommodate spectators unable to fit within the arena's confines. Such amenities were common in sprawling hive cities, where population size necessitated alternative viewing options for major events. What troubled the Grey Knight was the convergence of the massive cracks from the earthquake upon the building. While it confirmed their destination, it also hinted at a more sinister reality, that this structure served as the focal point of the demonic activity. Regardless of the implications, their mission remained clear. Halt whatever malevolent forces were at work. With determination, he pointed towards the looming structure. "That's our destination, I'm certain," he declared. Beside him, Banner observed the building's ominous facade, connecting the dots between the fissures' alignment and the structure's significance. "You're right," Banner concurred. "The cracks all lead here. Could it be the epicenter of a ritual? And if so, is it complete or merely in progress?" The Grey Knight, impressed once again by Banner's perceptiveness, regarded him with a stern gaze. In the grand scheme of their dire circumstances, Banner's deductions were not unfounded. "I cannot say," the Grey Knight responded, "but within lie our answers." Banner acknowledged with a nod, and the duo resumed their journey. The square's subtle slope funneled them toward the central structure, a gradual descent marked by the remnants of battle and upheaval. Whether by design or supernatural intervention, the terrain's decline was evident, guiding them inexorably towards their destination. Yet progress was impeded by more detritus, hindrances that taxed Banner's stamina until exhaustion would claim him once more. "I need a moment's rest," Banner admitted, his weariness apparent. "We're venturing into the unknown, and if I'm to be of any use, I must regain my strength." The Grey Knight, begrudgingly accepting the necessity of pause, surveyed their surroundings. Nestled within the protective cover of a burnt-out tank, they found temporary refuge, concealed from prying eyes by the vehicle's scorched husk. Moreover, they stood within an impact crater, its depths providing ample concealment. Recognizing the tactical advantage, the Grey Knight nodded in agreement, lowering himself to one knee and obscuring his form with the crater's rim. "Tell me, Amadeus," Banner inquired, his voice a mix of curiosity and skepticism, "how can you be certain this is our destination? There could be similar structures scattered throughout the city, forming a larger pattern." Initially engrossed in their mission, the Grey Knight didn't immediately ponder the guardsman's words. "I have a feeling that—" But then it dawned on him. Banner had addressed him by name. A chill ran down Amadeus' spine. He had never disclosed his name to the mortal, nor would he ever do so recklessly. Names held power, both among demons and mortals. Revealing one's true name could grant leverage to the listener. Whirling to face Banner, Amadeus reached for his sword, his anger barely contained. "I never divulged my name to you," he thundered. "How do you know it? Speak swiftly before I strike you down where you sit." Banner's confusion was palpable as he met Amadeus's gaze. "What do you mean? Surely you must have shared your name with me, my lord. You may have simply forgotten." Amadeus snarled, rising to his feet, his blade pointed accusingly at the guardsman. "I have not! It's a closely guarded secret, impossible for you to know. Who are you?" Banner's expression shifted from confusion to disappointment, then contorted into a malicious grin, sending another shiver down Amadeus' spine. Suddenly, his mind was flooded with memories of the events leading up to their current predicament. The first recollection was just after his encounter with Banner, before the initial demon assault. He remembered the girl's scream, but now, upon reflection, he realized it held more than mere terror. Hidden beneath the noise were words, ancient and ominous, spoken in Anokien, the language of the divine. Though he couldn't comprehend their meaning, he knew they held immense power, capable of creation and destruction. Another memory flashed before him, the moment the Tzeentchian demon had attacked. Once more, the girl's scream contained those cryptic words. Amadeus sought to understand their origin. Though Banner had saved him on both occasions, the visions all pointed to one unsettling truth, with Banner as the common thread. And then a third vision, the appearance of the little girl herself. Throughout the encounter with the demonette, a whisper had lingered in the air. Could it have been Banner whispering? Amadeus initially dismissed the notion. Surely he would have noticed if the mortal had spoken, but then he realized he had never seen Banner's face or lips during those moments. Was it possible? At first, he resisted the idea, but as he applied the principles of Occam's razor, no other explanation seemed plausible.
You summoned the demons!
Amadeus's voice boomed with a mixture of puzzlement and rage, his disbelief echoing through the ruins. Banner's grin widened, his eyes locked onto Amadeus's with a chilling intensity. With a nonchalant gesture, he lowered his head, never breaking eye contact, and raised his arms in a mock display of surrender. "Well, I guess you caught me," Banner admitted, his grin betraying a hint of amusement. "To be honest, I thought you'd have figured it out right away, or at least sooner than this." Amadeus, conditioned to suppress emotions in favor of battlefield clarity, found himself overwhelmed by a tumult of anger, grief, and betrayal. These sensations, long dormant, surged through him with a vengeance, yet he wasted no time. In a fury fueled by centuries of discipline and combat prowess, he lunged at Banner with all the speed and strength of a transhuman warrior. His sword cleaved through the air with such velocity that it left a shimmering trail in its wake, striking where he had aimed with such force that it sent dust scattering in all directions. Banner, with reflexes far beyond mortal limits, had effortlessly evaded the blow, slipping away like a shadow. Confusion clouded Amadeus's mind as he swung once more, but Banner danced aside with eerie grace, his grin undiminished. In a fluid motion, Banner leapt from the crater's depths, vaulting to a height no mortal could achieve, landing atop the charred wreckage of the burnt tank behind the Grey Knight, his position now one of dominance. Banner's voice, a chilling amalgamation of several tones, reverberated through the ruins, freezing Amadeus's blood to ice. "Oh, poor Amadeus," Banner taunted, the words dripping with mockery. "The mortal really got to you, didn't he? Tut, tut." With a swift turn, the Grey Knight locked eyes with the figure perched above him, the ghastly grin etched upon its face. "I did so enjoy observing you both from the shadows," the simulacrum continued, its voice echoing with sinister delight. "It brought me so much joy to call upon my servants to attack you. I must congratulate you. You made it far farther than I ever expected. Many thanks to that mortal, of course. But no matter. I will have soon succeeded with my task here. And besides, hearing those girly screams the mortal made every time one of my minions attacked was almost reward enough." The realization hit the Grey Knight like a thunderbolt, dispelling the fog of confusion and fury. He roared, his voice resonating with righteous indignation. "You are not Banner!" he thundered, the statement ringing out like a challenge. His simulacrum chuckled darkly, its laughter echoing through the ruins. "Of course not," it admitted, its tone dripping with malice. "However, I must admit it was fun to wear his skin for a while and see you up close. Did you ever suspect me, I wonder?" The simulacrum contorted and twisted before the Grey Knight's eyes, morphing into a grotesque demonic form with wings adorned in blue feathers, talons extended like daggers, and a beaked visage akin to a bird of prey. It grew in size, looming over the ruins with a terrifying presence. With a final grand flourish, the demon unfurled its wings, its full, awe-inspiring form revealed. "No, Amadeus," the demon spoke, its voice a curious blend of guttural tones and unearthly beauty. "I am not the puny mortal you call a companion. I am the one you seek, the architect of..." Before the demon could finish its grandiose proclamation, the Grey Knight's fury erupted like a tempest.
"Where is he? What have you done to Banner?"
he demanded, his voice thundering through the square. The demon paused in its pacing atop the tank, its avian features contorted into a grin. "Oh, Amadeus, poor Amadeus," the demon taunted, its tone dripping with malice. "You are so eager and so emotional for one of your kind. Isn't that beneath you? I thought that bastard Sigilite had taught you to control your emotions." Despite the demon's provocation, the knight remained absolute, his voice ice-cold with determination.
"I repeat, what have you done with him?"
he demanded, his words laced with a steely resolve. The demon's grin widened at the Grey Knight's question, reveling in the unfolding drama. "You know, the worst part is that this is all your fault," the demon hissed, its voice a sinister whisper that cut through the air like a serrated blade. "Leaving the mortal alone like that, wounded and scared. He cried out for you, you know, before I took him." The demon's words ignited a firestorm of rage within Amadeus, and once more he lost control, his voice reverberating with fury.
"Where is he?"
But as the words left his lips, Amadeus realized his mistake. It was exactly what the demon desired, to goad him into a frenzy, to revel in his anguish. With a contemptuous sneer, the demon resumed its pacing, its taloned appendage tracing malevolent patterns in the air. "He's around," the demon replied, its voice dripping with malicious glee. "The real question you should ask yourself is in how many locations. By now, given my minion's aptitude for tearing mortals apart, and their appetite for doing so, he could be in one location, or several." A feeling akin to fear gripped Amadeus like a vice, a feeling he had not felt for centuries. Had he truly failed the guardsmen so profoundly? The thought was unbearable. No one deserved such a fate, to be torn asunder by demons.
"You lie!"
Amadeus exclaimed, his voice the roar of a cannon.
"Bring him here now, or else!"
The demon's grin twisted into an evil laugh at Amadeus's demand. "Or else what?" the demon cackled, its voice dripping with contempt. "You'll banish me? Then you'll never see your beloved mortal again." With a malevolent grace, the demon leapt off the tank, landing with a thud at the bottom of the crater before Amadeus. The ground trembled beneath its weight as it began to pace slowly around the Grey Knight, its eyes fixed on him like predatory orbs. "You have nothing to bargain with," the demon taunted. "At least nothing you can give me. Nothing at all. The mortal is mine." Amadeus felt the weight of his failure crashing down around him, his shoulders sagging in resignation. He had let Banner down, and now he had to pay the price. With a resolve born of desperation, Amadeus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I will take his place," he vowed. The demon, its grin widening with anticipation, halted in its tracks, eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "Will you now?" it mused, tone dripping with malice. "How interesting." Tapping its talon against its beak in a manner that bordered on mockery, the demon spoke again. "And how do I know you will uphold your end of the bargain?" "You have my word," Amadeus declared through gritted teeth. At this, the demon let out a chilling laugh, a sound that echoed with the madness of the warp.
"Your word? That means absolutely nothing to me, Grey Knight."
In a surge of anger and conviction, Amadeus bellowed, his voice cutting through the tension like a battle cry.
"I swear it on the holy throne of terror, on his holy saints and the Sigilite himself."
The demon, momentarily taken aback by the Grey Knight's fervor, halted again in its tracks. "Oh, you really are serious about this," the demon mused, a hint of bewilderment coloring its tone. "Very well. I will accept your offer. A soul for a soul." The demon circled back in front of Amadeus, its talons slicing through the air with a sinister grace. At first there was a subtle disturbance, barely perceptible, like the quiver of reality itself. Then the space between the talons began to warp and twist, like a tear in the fabric of the material universe. Slowly, from this distortion, a dark speck emerged, gradually expanding into a swirling globe of shifting hues, from abyssal black to royal purple, then to an eerie azure. Suddenly, the azure sphere contracted, collapsing into a single point, and time seemed to hold its breath. In an instant, the point erupted with a thunderous boom, collapsing upon itself in a blinding flash of searing white light. Amadeus shielded his eyes against the brilliance, the intensity overwhelming even the capabilities of his helm's master-crafted lenses. As the light dissipated, leaving ghostly remnants dancing in his vision, he dared to look once more at the demon before him. To his relief and horror, he beheld Banner's motionless form lying at the demon's feet amidst the rubble at the crater's base. But his relief swiftly turned to anguish as he observed the grievous injuries inflicted upon his comrade. Half of Banner's body was charred and broken, his flesh seared and smouldering, a testament to the merciless violence of the warp.
"I commanded you to bring him here unharmed," Amadeus roared, his voice reverberating with a mix of fury and despair.
The demon's grin faltered for the briefest of moments, as if stung by the Grey Knight's words, a direct assault on its pride and prowess. "First of all," the demon retorted, "I never agreed to such terms. Second, he appears quite intact to my eyes. Though, admittedly," its grin returned, wicked and mocking, "I am not versed in the intricacies of mortal anatomy. My expertise lies more in the art of rending flesh apart, rather than how it gets together." But the Grey Knight paid the demon's words little heed, his focus solely on his fallen comrade.
"Banner, can you hear me? Are you okay?"
At first, there was no response from the prone figure, the weight of silence heavy upon him. Then, to Amadeus's profound relief, a cough echoed from Banner's lips, followed by a stirring of movement. Though Banner's head remained bowed, facing into the debris, he managed to lift his burnt hand, offering a feeble thumbs up. Yet, as if to temper the gesture's optimism, he slowly turned his hand, directing the thumb downward. With a rush of relief, Amadeus exhaled audibly, his tone tinged with a hint of jubilation.
"Excellent, you're okay."
At this, Banner raised his singed visage from the wreckage, his expression a blend of anger and bewilderment. "Seriously?" he retorted, his tone heavy with sarcasm. "Does this look okay to you?" He gestured to his burned hand, its flesh blackened and blistered, the bones beneath charred and exposed in places. The demon's snicker echoed through the crater, a sinister sound that seemed to twist the very air around them before its attention swung back to the Grey Knight. "See? The mortal lives. I've upheld my part of the bargain. Now you will come with me willingly." Amadeus met the demon's gaze with unyielding resolve. "A bargain is a bargain," he stated firmly. The demon's claws clapped together in macabre applause, its laughter resonating like the tolling of a crypt bell. "Oh, how delightful!" it exclaimed, jovial as a child during the sanguinala. "We will have such fun together, you and I. Well, perhaps not you, but certainly I and my cohort. We shall take our time with you, and you will experience the full extent of our ability to transform one thing into another." As realization dawned on Banner, he cried out in protest.
"No! Don't do this! Don't trade yourself for me! I'm nobody!"
But the demon's gaze fell upon Banner with fury, its voice reverberating with a deafening screech that sent tremors through the crater.
"Silence!"
The demon's attention swung back to Amadeus, grin widening as it rubbed its talons together with malicious anticipation. Paying no heed to the mortal at its feet, it began to advance slowly towards the Grey Knight. Meanwhile, Banner, trembling but resolute, slowly rose to his knees. Across from them, Amadeus observed Banner's posture and noticed something clutched tightly to his chest, the dagger. It gleamed in his healthy hand, a stark contrast to the charred ruin of his other. Amadeus realized with a pang of irritation that Banner must have concealed the dagger within his garments before the demon seized him. The oversight of not noticing its absence from the demon's simulacrum vexed him. The demon now towered over Amadeus, approached with an air of triumph. Without hesitation, Amadeus took a step forward and released his sword, allowing it to plunge tip first into the ground, its hilt defiantly pointed skyward. With a gesture of surrender, he raised his arms and spoke calmly, yet resolutely. "You have honored your end, demon. My oath binds me to uphold mine." The demon's grin widened again at these words, relishing its victory and envisioning the rewards it would reap for delivering such a formidable prize to its master. Amadeus, after all, was not just an ordinary Astartes, but a Grey Knight, an adversary trained explicitly to combat creatures like itself. The demon's mind buzzed with anticipation of the accolades it would receive. But Amadeus's next words shattered its reverie, bringing its attention sharply back to the present. "Before we depart, demon, have you ever heard the scream of a little girl?" The demon's stride faltered, its expression briefly betraying surprise as it pondered the Grey Knight's cryptic inquiry. Sensing an opportunity, Amadeus stole a glance at Banner, who grasped the meaning behind his question and promptly unleashed a piercing scream. Startled by the screech, the demon turned towards the source of the sound, momentarily distracted. Seizing the moment, Amadeus lunged for his sword, swiftly unsheathing it from the ground and driving it upward with all his might. The blade cleaved deep into the demon's left leg and onward to sever its wing with a sickening slice. A roar of agony erupted from the creature as it whipped around, unleashing a furious counterattack. With a brutal swipe of its talon, it sent Amadeus hurtling through the air, crashing beyond the crater's rim with a deafening impact. As Amadeus disappeared from view, the demon fixed its gaze on Banner with a menacing hiss. "You!" the demon's voice echoed with menace. "I will deal with you later. Behold my wing, my exquisite wing. You shall rue this distraction. I shall teach you the meaning of eye for an eye." Banner, paralyzed by terror, stammered out the first words that came to mind. But I don't have any wings." With a disdainful roll of its eyes, the demon uttered a guttural curse and bounded out of the crater in pursuit of the Space Marine. The Grey Knight hit the ground hard, his breath knocked out of him, unable to recover before the demon reached him. It screeched at him, accusatory. You deceiver! You never intended to accompany me, and here I was planning to betray you, to whisk you into the warp in return for that mortal." Rather than attacking Amadeus directly, the demon rushed forward and stomped down on his sword, shattering it into pieces. Whispers filled the air as the sword broke, and a sudden gust of wind swept through the square. The demon, exhilarated by disarming the Grey Knight, grinned once more. "Oh, poor Amadeus, what will you do now without your blade?" the demon mocked, voice dripping with malice. "You truly are breaking your oaths today. First you betrayed me, which I could forgive. However, I wonder what your corpse god will think of you failing to kill me. Will he forgive that, I wonder?" With an evil cackle, the demon took a step back and delivered a swift kick to the Grey Knight's side, sending him hurtling across the open expanse. Amadeus's flight abruptly ended as he crashed into a still-standing rockcrete wall from a smaller building that once occupied the square. The impact was so forceful that cracks spiderwebbed through the wall behind him, leaving him lodged in a crater, feet barely touching the ground. The breath was once more knocked from his lungs, and as he struggled to recover, he realized something was amiss. Something within the rockcrete had pierced his armor, wounding at least one of his lungs and his primary heart. His vision blurred, the square becoming just a hazy tableau before him. Despite his impairments, he could still discern the hulking form of the demon marching inexorably towards him. Moments later, it loomed over him, a massive head poised level with his face. "You know what, Grey Knight?" the demon hissed, voice laced with venom. "I think I've changed my mind. I don't want to play with you after all. I think I will simply kill you. Whatever's left of you, that is. Consider this swift death a blessing from your corpse god." Amadeus felt his life ebbing away from the injuries inflicted by the demon, strength fading as the demon raised its claw, poised to strike the final blow. "Any last words, Amadeus?" the demon taunted, laughter echoing through the square. "Perhaps a prayer to that skeleton on terror." But then, from behind them, Banner's voice rang out. "Hey, bird brain!" The demon's expression swiftly shifted from triumph to irritation and fury as it whirled around to face the mortal. There stood Banner, resolute at the crater's edge. In his undamaged right hand, he clutched Amadeus's dagger, pulsating with blue energy, and in his burnt, seemingly useless left hand, he gripped a long metal pole nearly 3 meters, bearing the standard of his company. The banner fluttered atop the pole, its colors unnaturally vibrant, seemingly aglow with an otherworldly light. Even Banner himself appeared to emit a faint golden aura, reminiscent of his defiance against the demon.
"If you want him, you'll have to go through me," Banner declared boldly, his voice unwavering and filled with determination.
Amadeus, realizing the role reversal, attempted to speak, but his words emerged only as feeble whispers.
"No, Banner. Run."
The demon, frustrated by this interruption to its triumph, turned back to Amadeus with a hiss of annoyance.
"Oh, just be quiet and die in silence, knight. Why don't you just hang around here for a while? If you try not to die too quickly, you can witness me finishing off this insolent mortal pest."
But Banner, with a grin upon his face, simply stared defiantly at the demon.
"Come get me, you overgrown chicken!"
Chapter 8. Battle. For a fleeting moment, Banner questioned the wisdom of his bold taunt as he beheld the enraged demon hurtling towards him. His bravery wavered, but only briefly, for he knew he acted in service of the Grey Knights. Who else would stand against such a monstrous foe?
"I will tear you to ribbons and feed them one by one to my minions,"
the demon snarled as it charged. Yet Banner remained unmoved, standing firm with the dagger in one hand and his standard in the other. The threats fell on deaf ears as the demon bore down on him, its relentless advance akin to a cataclysm, rending chunks of rockcrete from the ground with each thunderous step. With only a few paces between them, Banner unleashed a primal roar of fury, feeling a surge of otherworldly energy coursing through him. In a blur of motion, he charged forward, planting his foot against the base of the banner pole and thrusting it forth like a spear, the standard still aloft due to the momentum of his thrust. Caught off guard by his swift maneuver, the demon was unable to alter its course in time. It impaled itself upon the pole, the banner vanishing into its chest cavity. The collision was staggering, halting the demon's charge just as its body loomed over Banner, head mere inches above his own. Swiftly relinquishing the pole, Banner sidestepped along the crater's rim, keeping a watchful eye as the demon staggered in disarray, fixated on the wound in its chest. A river of black ichor oozed from the gash, tracing a dark path down the length of the pole before vaporizing on contact with the ground, wisps of black smoke curling into the air with a hiss.
"I can't believe that worked,"
Banner exclaimed, a mix of astonishment and elation coloring his voice. The demon, its gaze fixed upon the guardsman, clenched the pole with taloned fingers, sinking to one knee. Pain and confusion etched across its features. It looked up at Banner, who returned the gaze with a defiant grin.
"Now prepare to die, or whatever it is you demons do," Banner declared, tightening his grip on the dagger as he took a step closer.
But just as his determination set in, horror washed over Banner like a tide. The demon's laughter, a cacophony of voices woven into a mocking symphony, reverberated throughout the square, each note piercing his resolve.
"Oh, you foolish mortal,"
the demon chortled, its laughter echoing with ominous resonance. With one guttural snarl, the demon lowered a talon to its side, seizing the pole with the other. In a single fluid motion, it yanked it out, along with the blood-soaked Banner, unleashing a torrent of black vitae that spattered across the ground. Standing once more, the demon examined the pole briefly before discarding it to the ground with a disdainful toss. The metallic clunk as it struck the earth echoed ominously across the square, stark contrast to the chaotic laughter still emanating from the demon's beak.
"You truly thought you could defeat me that easily, with a metal pole no less?" The demon cackled in mock laughter. "You are as foolish as you look, mortal, and I will never grasp what Amadeus sees in you."
Dread flooded Banner once more, a sensation far more chilling than the fear he'd experienced when first ambushed upon entering the city. Panic seized him, rendering him breathless and unable to think clearly. All he could do was flee. Spinning around, he bolted with an intensity he'd never known, fueled by pure adrenaline. It felt as though some unseen force propelled him onwards, urging him to escape. The demon's voice, laced with amusement, echoed after him.
"Running away, are you? Pathetic! Where do you think you'll go?"
Ignoring the taunts, Banner sprinted onwards, disappearing inside the rubble. Observing the guardsman's trajectory, the demon's amusement turned to curiosity. "Not only is the mortal fleeing," it muttered to itself, "but he's headed straight for the heart of the ritual. What is he planning?" A revelation dawned upon the demon. The ritual remained incomplete, vulnerable to interruption. In a panic, momentarily forgetting its missing wing, the demon attempted flight. Its misjudged effort ending in a clumsy leap, followed by a crashing descent to the ground. Frustrated, it struck the ground with a thunderous blow before giving chase to Banner on foot. Despite his head start, his mortal speed paled in comparison to the warp-spawned creature. Soon the demon closed the gap, lashing out at the guardsman with ferocious strikes. Banner evaded, but fortune abandoned him when a blow caught his backpack, sending him tumbling. Surprised by its own success, the demon momentarily diverted its attention to the fallen guardsman. This lapse in focus proved costly, as it failed to notice a large piece of debris on the ground. With a resounding crash, it tripped and tumbled headlong into a pile of rubble. Swiftly regaining its composure, the demon witnessed Banner nearing the Colosseum stairs. Desperate, it unleashed a vile threat.
"If you go in there, I will hunt you down and flay your parents and brother alive."
The word froze Banner in his tracks, the demon sensing it had struck a raw nerve.
"I'll peel their skin off one flake at a time," the demon continued, relishing the torment. "And regardless of their screams or pleas, I will not relent. And then before their hearts give out, I will ensure they know it was you, their beloved Banner, who brought their torment upon them."
At first, horror consumed Banner, but it soon ignited into righteous fury. Wheeling to face the demon, he denounced it with seething rage.
"You are a fiend and a liar!"
Banner's voice thundered with anger. The demon's laughter filled the air, its response dripping with malice.
"Why don't you go in and find out?
Perhaps I am lying." Its tone turned colder, more sinister.
"Then again, maybe I'm not."
Fear and fury waged war within Banner as he grappled with the dire implications. He scanned his surroundings, seeking a glimmer of hope, a way out of his predicament.
"There is still a chance,"
he whispered to himself, looking down at the dagger in his hand. Empowered by a surge of resolve, Banner seized the dagger in a tight grip, its familiar weight a reassuring presence in his hand. Summoning every ounce of his strength, he adopted a firm stance and hurled the blade towards the demon. But despite his efforts, the throw went awry, far wide of its mark. The demon, initially taken aback by the sudden attack, watched with stunned amusement as the dagger sailed harmlessly over it. It then regarded the dagger resting on the ground, its gaze shifting back to Banner with a mix of mockery and curiosity. With a mocking laugh, the demon gestured towards the dagger with one of its clawed hands.
"Nice throw, mortal," it jeered. "But tell me, what were you aiming for? The Eye of Terror? If so, I must regrettably inform you that you missed."
It shook its head in disdain, movements oozing confidence as it advanced towards the guardsman, frozen on the Colosseum steps.
"Poor mortal," it taunted. "You had the chance to end me, truly. But when it mattered most, you squandered your only opportunity. How fitting."
With a ferocious swipe of its talon, the demon lunged at Banner, forcing him to fling himself to the ground, narrowly evading the deadly strike. As he lay there, the looming presence of the demon cast a dark shadow over him. Banner, seizing a fleeting moment, turned onto his back, raising his burnt hand in a desperate plea.
"Wait!" he cried out.
The demon was poised to strike, and halted at the mortal's words, expression twisted in disgust.
"Wait?" it snarled. "Wait for what? For you to attempt another futile escape? For you to prolong your meaningless existence by a few more seconds? Tell me, mortal, what are we waiting for?"
But instead of fear or submission, Banner erupted into laughter, a booming, defiant sound that echoed in the air. Perplexed by this unexpected reaction, the demon frowned in confusion.
"What's so amusing?" it demanded. "Stop laughing! Has your feeble mortal mind finally succumbed to the inevitability of your demise?"
Banner's smirk remained as he ceased his laughter.
"No, I just needed you to keep talking, to distract you long enough for him to get closer," he revealed.
The demon's expression shifted momentarily to puzzlement before realization dawned. With a swift turn, it faced the source of its newfound dread. Before it stood Amadeus, panting but resolute, clutching the shimmering blue dagger. Despite the grievous wounds he bore, Amadeus had rallied, defying death itself to confront the demon. The realization struck the demon like a blow. It had been manipulated by the mortal's cunning stratagem. The purpose behind Banner's seemingly errant throw became chillingly clear. The dagger was not intended for the demon, but for the knight. With steely resolve, Amadeus met the demon's gaze through his blue helm lenses, his voice cutting through the tension with icy resolve.
"The Emperor protects," he declared.
In a swift and decisive motion, the knight thrust the dagger into the still open wound in the demon's chest caused by the blow of the banner pole. The demon's visage contorted in surprise before erupting into a cacophony of inhuman agony. Radiant blue light emanated from the wound as its form began to disintegrate around the dagger, the surrounding area darkening and dissolving into oblivion. As the demon writhed in its death throes, its form was consumed in a vortex of embers and dust. Victory seemed assured, prompting a hearty roar of triumph from Banner. Yet his exultation swiftly turned to horror as the demon, in a final act of spite, lashed out at him with its disintegrating claw, tearing across his chest. The screams of agony morphed into wicked laughter as it dissolved into nothingness, leaving only its malevolent eye to fixate on Banner with a chilling glare of triumph. Then it was gone. With the vanishing of the demon, a psychic shockwave rippled outward from its demise, heralding a profound shift in the world around them. The air shimmered, and the once muted sounds of the city returned as the cracks that marred the city's surface began to recede. It became evident that with its death, the source of power driving the demonic ritual had been extinguished. Victory, though hard won, had been achieved. As the demon dissolved, Amadeus's sight of Banner cleared, revealing his figure. Relief washed over him at first, but it swiftly turned dark as he witnessed Banner falter. Clutching his abdomen, the man sank to his knees, his face drained of color, but still marked by a defiant grin. "That was one angry chicken." Banner's voice trailed off as a spurt of blood erupted from his lips, staining the ground crimson before he collapsed. Amadeus rushed to his side, heart sinking as he knelt beside his fallen comrade. "Banner, are you—" Amadeus began, but Banner's blood-soaked whisper cut him off. Don't you dare ask me if I'm okay." Amadeus faced the grim reality with stoic resolve. The sight before him was not one of hope, but of the inevitable. Banner's form resembled more a carcass of charred grox meat than a living being. "No, I won't ask that," Amadeus spoke, voice heavy with acceptance. "I believe this is the end. For both of us." He paused, gazing into the void for a moment before continuing. "I hear the Emperor calling me. He calls my name from beyond." Banner's voice, tinged with panic, broke through. What about me? I don't hear him." Amadeus placed his gauntleted hand gently on Banner's chest, a gesture of respect tinged with solemnity. "You have fought braver than any mortal I have ever witnessed, or even heard of. If a mortal has ever earned a place by the Emperor's side, it is you, brother," Amadeus said with reverence. He then clasped Banner's right, unburnt arm in the warrior's handshake, though the size disparity between them was stark. Banner's gaze shifted from Amadeus's arm to his face, puzzled by the term brother. Brother? Banner stammered weakly. "I haven't even seen your face. I barely know your name." With a calm demeanor, Amadeus removed his helmet, revealing a countenance that defied Banner's expectations. His amber eyes met Banner's, framed by waves of black hair, and a faint smile graced his lips. "My name is Amadeus Fortium," he said softly. "Now rest. You have earned it." As Banner's eyes began to close, a sudden clarity pierced the moment, and he spoke in a voice that seemed not entirely his own. "For the Emperor, beyond the point of death." Banner's voice trailed off as his head slumped back onto the ground, his final breath escaping him. Moments later, Amadeus collapsed beside him, his secondary heart succumbing to the accumulated trauma. Yet before his own demise, a faint whisper echoed across the square, a solemn utterance from the Grey Knight. "In dedicato imperatum ultra articulo mortis." Chapter 9. Epilogue. Seated in a high-backed crimson leather chair, the elder man faced a woman of ethereal allure, her age veiled by the rejuvenat treatments so prevalent amongst the esteemed ranks of the Holy Inquisition. Despite his tenure, he couldn't fathom her years. She had been probing him for hours, her inquiries fixated on his son and wife. "Once more, Mr. Bannerson, please accept my condolences," the the Inquisitor murmured, her head shaking in sympathy. For both your wife and your son. Thank you, my lady, Bannerson Sr. replied solemnly. The news of our son, as I mentioned, devastated her. The Inquisitor offered a sympathetic nod before pressing on. Could you recount the events for me once more? Banner Sr. let out a weary sigh at the repetitive query, his patience tested by the Inquisition's persistent line of questioning. Yet he understood the gravity of the situation. No inquiry from an Inquisitor could be dismissed, no matter how often it was repeated. The news struck her hard, Banner Sr. reiterated, his tone heavy with the weight of his words. But then it took a darker turn, as I've recounted. The woman inclined her head once more, her expression expectant. Darker, you say? How so? After she witnessed the burning figure. And what did she make of this burning figure? The Inquisitor pressed, leaning in with a keen interest. She claimed it was a man ablaze, his visage naught but a skull engulfed in flames, Banner Sr. recounted, voice tinged with unease. This apparition, or whatever a malign entity it was, appeared to her in the dead of night. The Inquisitor absorbed the information with a nod, her focus unwavering. Did the apparition communicate any message, or leave anything behind? Banner Sr. shook his head solemnly, a sense of foreboding hanging in the air. No, nothing of the sort, Banner Sr. affirmed, his voice carrying a hint of disbelief. It appeared, then, as she describes it, vanished into the ether. Yet she insists it was our Banner, transformed into a spectral entity, fighting in the service of the Emperor. He sighed deeply before continuing. Even worse, our youngest, Standard, who's currently enlisted, believes her, Banner Sr. lamented, his words tinged with a mix of disbelief and frustration. It's utterly ludicrous, I know. Just saying it aloud makes me want to scoff. Madness, surely. The Inquisitor remained silent, her gaze fixed upon him as she rose from her seat, striding purposefully towards the door. Just before exiting, she paused in the threshold, pivoting to face Banner Sr. once more. Far less than you might believe, she replied, her tone grave with significance. As she made to depart, the abrupt query from the older man halted her in her tracks. Wait, I never caught your name. Who are you? Banner Sr. called out urgently. Turning back, a faint smile graced the woman's lips as she answered. VIII. Amberley VIII.